My fellow Westorians, I'm Aziz. With me is Ashea, and this is Valar Rereadis. As we finish A Feast for Crows, Valar Rereadis seeks to entertain while preparing you for the Winds of Winter. Many of the new plot lines and locations launched in this book are not yet resolved, taking us to our greatest heights of mystery yet. For the remainder of the Valar Rereadis journey, we'll be looking ahead as much, if not more, than we've been looking back. But the core message remains the same.
The best books are those that hold up to repeated rereading. George R. R. Martin.
That's right. Shout out to Dornish Dame and a whole bunch of other folks who have been reading along with us and attending the chats later. Dornish Dame just said, Feast for Crows gets better with every reread. And I tend to agree with that. It is a book that, as we talked about at the beginning, it wasn't the most well received, but time has really changed people's outlook on it. Almost anyone who reads it more than one time grows to love it more. That's a pretty normal pattern, and I've been seeing for a long time, since I've been around since this book was new. I read it the day it came out. If you're watching live, you can feel free to ask live questions. You can also send questions and comments ahead of time by joining us on one of our social media outlets. Facebook, Flick, Discord, or Slack are the main ones. Of course, I recommend you check out the Isle of Faces podcast. That's Joe Buckley's Scraps and Scrolls edition. He covers Valar Rereadis in tandem with us, the same set of chapters each week. And you can find his thoughts throughout our episodes as well. Same goes for Nina, except instead of a podcast, you can check out her blog on goodqueenalley.tumblr.com. That's Good Queen Alley with one L. And you all are definitely familiar with her thoughts by now, but you can find more of them over there. You can join us on Patreon to support us financially. You can also get things like access to scripts, shout-outs, bonus episodes. We got a nice little group of bonus episodes. Some of y'all have never heard before. That'd be a nice way to get a little additional content. But if you want to keep it simpler, you don't want to deal with anything, you want to just set up a monthly contribution and forget about it, perhaps it's better to do that on Anchor through Spotify. And you can check that out. The links are in the description. Today, as we said, it's the last set of chapters for A Feast for Crows. It's both really exciting and a little sad. We start with Brienne 8, the one with sword or noose, aka the gang hangs the gang.
Cersei 10. Help me, Jaime Lannister. You're my only hope, aka the Sparrow traps the lion.
Jaime 7, Goldenhand, the just say no to Cersei, aka the one where Blackfish escapes, Brotherhood infiltrates.
And finally, Sam 5, the gang meets Marwyn the Mage, a.k.a. Pate is dead, long live Pate.
An interesting feature of A Feast for Crows is that there are no large battles. The attack on the Shield Islands and the follow-up attacks during the Mander and at Old Town and Arbor is the largest we have, and the vast majority of it happens off-page. Through Sam, we see some of the aftermath, and it looks fairly substantial, though certainly nothing like, say, the Blackwater. Stannis has gone north, Mance Rayder's been defeated, Robb is dead, Jon stabbing sets up a fight at the Wall, the Golden Company will invade the east, but that's in A Dance with Dragons too. The Dance with Dragons also sets up the Battle of Ice and the Battle of Fire. The Forsaken and Samwell 5 set up the Battle of Blood. As snow falls at the end of Jaime 7, we're reminded just how foolish all this war is. Today, watch the eyes. Brienne's blue eyes ditto that of Sansa, whom she searches for, even in her dreams, and calls aloud. The ruby eyes of her sword, the red eyes of Stoneheart, Podrick's eyes, they don't even lift up as he is by the noose. Maggie the Frogs are yellow, and today Cersei takes a long look at the gemstone eyes of the god statues at the Great Sept and sees black, green, and yellow. Jaime notes the ice chip eyes of Sybelle Spicer, which reminds us a bit of Roose Bolton's eyes, the blue hatred from Edmure's eyes, and the deep green of his mother's eyes in that dream? Samwell sees evidence of the attacks of a man with multicolored eyes when he gets to Old Town. Last time we mentioned that Arianne's chapter kicked off a pattern of captivity-oriented chapters, and we see a lot of that today. Brienne held by the Brotherhood, Cersei taken by the Sparrows not long after she has Marjorie and a bunch of others arrested, so there's them too. Then we have Jaime overseeing the disposition of several captives at River Run, notably Jane Westerling and Edmure Tully, but not the Blackfish. Similarly, and sometimes directly related, there are traps, often accompanied by a pattern of infiltration, but it also relates to the theme of playing roles we raised before. It's a similar concept, but more extreme. Cersei isn't just imprisoned, she's quite thoroughly set up by the High Sparrow first. He keeps up appearances for a while before the big reveal. Ryman Frey's travel is noted by the BWB, and he's ambushed. Jaime will be ambushed later by words, but thanks to the same BWB information network and tactics partly set up in Brienne's chapter and before it. Brienne is trapped by how bad the evidence against her looks and by the bitter vindictiveness of the Brotherhood and their leader. An Ironborn raider emerges from a hiding spot to ambush the Cinnamon Wind, but that does not go well for them thanks to Kojumo's archers. In Old Town, the Iron Men, among more direct methods, tried to get inside Old Town by disguising themselves as Tyrashi using dyes. A failure like it was with the Cinnamon Wind, but how many times before they succeed? It's good then that Sam plans to have Gilly live a few lies to win a place at Horn Hill, well inland. Usually infiltrations are more nefarious or grander than, hey, pretend to be someone so you can sneak in and have shelter. But hey, times are tough. Gilly and Sam got to do what they got to do. Of course, Jaqen Pate is perhaps the biggest infiltrator of them all today, or is it the reveal that glass candles can infiltrate someone's dreams? Does that not suggest a second look at dreams in the books, especially the recent ones? Well, Jaime's dream of his mother was pretty strange. The Brotherhood Without Banner is a major feature of the end of this book, twice in a row now. This time of Infiltrated Riverrun. With Tom of 07's at the least, perhaps even others there with him, we learn that he was with Ryman Frey as well, all part of his game to win trust and pass on information to his fellow BWBers. A big feature of the first chapter today, Brienne 8, the one with sword or noose, aka the gang hangs the gang. Sword or noose, yeah, but also helm and crown. Many important object symbols in this one, perhaps object lessons. This begins the first of 3 in a row to end the biggest 3 characters in terms of screen time in this book. Brienne, then Cersei, then Jaime. And then the 3 of them account for like 60% of the whole book. There are a huge number of parallels between these 3 chapters. Sometimes 2 of the 3 share something, sometimes all 3. It starts with just such an example.
This is an evil dream, she thought.
And it continues.
But if she were dreaming, why did it hurt so much?
Note the mirroring with Jaime's chapter. When he speaks to the person who he thinks is his mother, he's not sure if he's dreaming or not. When the fog of pain and fever clears, she realizes she's in captivity. And hey, just like in Jaime's chapter, it looks like he'll be joining her in captivity, and she'll be the one giving the invite. And in Jaime's dream, it's painful for him, too, to think of his mother, though a different kind of pain. It's not physical, but still, it's pain. It's a full circle style situation here. The 2 of them existed in the same storyline, that is, Brienne and Jaime, for most of A Storm of Swords, only to have their own arcs in A Feast for Crows, and now they'll seemingly join together again in that one A Dance with Dragons chapter from Jaime, and then going forward from there. In The Winds of Winter, we could start off with either of them. Who knows when we have this showdown, whether it will be Jaime's POV or Brienne's? That's a big open question. I really don't know. This was also the case when Jaime and Cersei were in King's Landing together. You never know which POV you're going to get. It could be covered either way. But I think this is when the first time it's really been suspenseful. Hasn't been remotely suspenseful before. Before it was just a curiosity. All this, of course, is in the Riverlands, both A Storm of Swords arc and the Feast for Crows arc for these characters, minus the time in King's Landing, of course. But the chronology of this chapter is somewhat revealed by the presence of Robb's crown, right? Ryman Frey was supposed to leave it with Jaime, as we mentioned at the time. He clearly didn't, because he was caught and hanged. Really, that's like a piece of hardware you don't want to be caught by Stoneheart with. Like, what's that you got there, Ryman Frey? Is that my son's crown? What are you doing with that? Yeah. So he was getting, I guess it didn't really matter, though. He was going to get hanged whether or not he had that crown, like Merritt, but still. It's kind of funny. And here is that crown. Quote.
A trestle table had been set up across the cave in a cleft in the rock. Behind it sat a woman all in gray, cloaked and hooded. In her hands was a crown, a bronze circlet ringed by iron swords. She was studying it, her fingers stroking the blades as if to test their sharpness. Her eyes glimmered under her hood. Gray was the color of the Silent Sisters, the handmaidens of the stranger. Brienne felt a shiver climb her spine. Stoneheart.
Yeah. What a thing for her to find. Stoneheart, I mean. What object could possibly cause her so much pain as that crown? The object that she objected to in the first place. She knew when Robb was crowned that it would lead to disaster, or at least she feared it would. And she lived through that all this time until now, or until the Red Wedding, whenever you want to put that milestone. This is not Brienne's first encounter with the supernatural, since she did encounter, after all, the Shadow. But it's kind of horrific in a special way to re-experience it under the circumstances, confronted by the one person who experienced the Shadow in Renly's tent with her, and the only other person besides Renly she's given an oath to. The beginning of this chapter feels like Brienne is reliving her part in Jaime's dream back in A Storm of Swords, so we have mirroring with a different Jaime dream as well. Anina notes Brienne thinks that all the world was wet, and when Brienne first appears in Jaime's dream, he hears her splashing behind him in a watery cavern. Brienne's wrists are bound in tight, wet ropes she can't escape, and in Jaime's dream, she's bound in heavy chains that Jaime has to cut for her. Wet ropes, we learn from the Ironborn chapters, when they get tight or wet, they get tighter, and ouch. Brienne thinks of herself as being surrounded by shadows, while in Jaime's dream, he and Brienne were surrounded by the shades of Rhaegar and his dead fellow Kingsguard. So lots of things in common there. And Brienne in her dream in Harrenhal isn't just haunted by the men she's killed, Shagwell, Pig, and Timian, but also by people she failed to keep from dying. This is another parallel to Jaime's Weirwood Stump dream. Brienne in that dream told Rhaegar that she swore an oath to keep Jaime safe, while the shades reproached Jaime for failing to do what he had sworn to do, which is keep the king and Rhaegar's children safe. In other words, failure to keep someone from dying or from being killed. Now, Brienne obviously had good reason to kill those brave companions, just as Jaime had good reason to kill Aerys, but they're still haunted by these other folk that they promised to protect. It's not coincidental that Brienne thinks in particular about Renly's death here not just because of Gendry's strong resemblance to him, but because of these oaths. The fact that, like I said, Renly was the first person she ever swore an oath to protect, and then Catelyn was the next. And that's a reminder that she's 0 for 2, right? I mean, she's not going to feel good about that. She also dreams of her tongue cut out and bloody, which is hopefully just metaphor about being tongue-tied, about feelings for Jaime or something. Doesn't have to be that specifically, rather than, some kind of foreshadowing. Losing tongues is too possible to not be considered. I kind of doubt Brienne will lose her tongue, but, I'm not 100% unworried about it. She thinks of fighting Clarence Crabb mounted on Aurochs while she lacks her sword. Casting him as an 8-foot-tall villain makes him sound like the Mountain, but it reminds me even more of the Bear in the Pit because, right, she was lacking her sword there too. Well, she had a sword, it wasn't a very good one, a blunt one. And if she thinks of Clarence Crabb as Shaggy too, so that fits pretty well. A lot of her dreams and memories are from events of this book. It's almost a recap in a lot of ways, but in a very dreamy way. Certainly not in a listing through or recounting the events. Just sort of a tour through her memories and dreams a bit. The BWB, Stoneheart included, treat the idea of Jaime's word with the level of contempt similar to that displayed by the Blackfish. Of course, they would have had that opinion without him. Perhaps he's already joined them. Maybe. Ryman leaves the day after Jaime forces him to go, and the gates open right away. So the chronology seems to be Tom and others, or maybe just Tom, pass along the info about Ryman to the BWB, and he's hanged, and then they show up here. But where is here? Well, we don't know. Brienne is feverish for most of it, though it involves a boat ride. It could be the caves Arya was in, but it doesn't have to be. They have multiple hideouts, as we know, because, well, they need to have multiple hideouts because they can't be caught in one of them. They need to have other places to flee to and other places to run to if they think one hideout has been compromised. So what I'm suggesting is maybe the Blackfish is already with them and we just haven't seen him, but honestly, they would have contempt for Jaime's word, even without the Blackfish weighing in. So it's no sure thing by any means. Anyway, whatever that situation is, we meet Thoros again here or there, wherever it is. And he says, living in these places for so long, paired with all their other sufferings, has changed them. Quote.
Justice. Thoros smiled wanly. I remember justice. It had a pleasant taste. Justice was what we were about when Beric led us, or so we told ourselves. We were kingsmen, knights, and heroes. But some nights are dark and full of terror, my lady. War makes monsters of us all.
Are you saying you are monsters?
I'm saying we are human. You are not the only one with wounds, Lady Brienne. Some of my brothers were good men when this began. Some were less good, shall we say. Though there are those who say it does not matter how a man begins, but only how he ends. I suppose it is the same for women.
Note the wordplay there. If you listen to this chapter on audiobook, or if you perhaps weren't paying super ultra close attention, you may have missed that when Thoros says some nights are dark and full of terror, he says nights with a K. He's talking about the men in armor, like the ones who Sandor and Brienne aren't. So that's a little clever there. In this quote, we have the continuing saga of the Broken Man. Obviously, a huge part of A Feast for Crows, especially the latter half. We've been talking about it pretty much consistently every week. There's been a Brienne chapter, and with a few others thrown in too. And it's illustrated here directly by men like Sandor Clegane. We saw most of the process play out, that he's discussed even when he's not in the scene. Unlike most broken men, Sandor does seem to have a future after all. This is reflected in the quote, there are those who say it doesn't matter how a man begins, but only how he ends. That's certainly a quote that indicates redemption is possible, at least in part. Beyond seeing the broken man process firsthand from the Hound, we get it described in detail by Elder Brother and Septon Maribald. And in true George R. R. Martin reread-oriented fashion, he has these characters explain this process to us after we've seen it. It continues here. Thoros takes up the mantle of describing broken men. He raises the stakes on this because he too is living that life while breaking it down for us. It's personal to him. Though of a different faith, his take seems to align with the other priestly types in many ways. After all, the priests are often, though not always, believers in forgiveness, and the ones who often firsthand deal with the unfortunate. The priests describing this phenomena of broken men is fitting because, like I said, who else is in the front lines in a world like this helping those broken men, or showing us the way, showing us how to feel, or helping us to understand their plight? And he does that here, feeding Brienne, even though she's apparently condemned, and even though Thoros doesn't look so good himself. After all, she first sees him as a, quote, old gray man in rags, and then...
He was clad in the ragged remains of an old robe, pink and white. His hair was long and gray and tangled. The loose skin of his cheeks and chin was covered with coarse stubble.
Yeah, he looks different than he did when he was talking about having lost his razor a while back. That razor is long, long gone now. But he does have coarse stubble, so he clearly has been able to shave a little bit. He has long hair, but his beard isn't very long. So, yeah. Anyway, he remarks on their decline. Food has been harder to come by, and of course it is. It's harder to come by food everywhere. And in Jaime's chapter 2 from now, it will snow. And that should be taken into account when we're considering the fate of the Brotherhood without banners, what they're going to have to do, what moves they're going to have to make. They're already somewhat desperate, likely to get worse. Now we have more reasons for it to get worse. Brienne notices it's already really cold in these caves where they're hiding. One thing they might get respite from is Randyll Tarly, though. They want to kill Hyle Hunt in this chapter because they know he works for Lord Tarly, even though technically it's worked for Randyll Tarly, not works. And Randyll Tarly has hanged a lot of theirs, as is mentioned in several places. It's a reminder of the enmity between these two groups, but the arrival of Aegon VI in the south, not to mention Margaery and Cersei's trials, leaves Randyll no more time for hunting outlaws. He's probably still going to hang some people. He is named Master of Laws by Kevin, and I bet he keeps that post under Aegon VI too, if not something even greater, if not other rewards going with it. But he's not going to be dealing with the Brotherhood anymore. That's going to be something for a subordinate or someone else, not for the Master Laws directly. Also not looking so great is Lem Lemoncloak, still wearing that same cloak. It's described as stained and tattered and sodden and filthy, but he's also wearing the Hound's helm. He's the third man to do so. He's a more broken man than most could ever be, mentioning in this chapter that his wife and daughter are dead. That particularly unimaginable pain is not mentioned alongside the typical sufferings of broken men. They leave their families, but a lot of times the families just lose them, and that's that. They can somewhat go on without their father figure. But in this case, it's the other way around. The broken man survived, the soldier survived, but the family did not. Nina writes that Lem taking the Hound's helm is a clear contrast to what we saw a few chapters ago with Podrick, where he refused the Lannister helm. Hyle protested, hey, that's a good perfectly good helmet. Podrick refused to wear dead man's armor. And here, Thoros protests Lem wearing the dead in quotes, hound's helm. Lem shrugs, it's good steel. Podrick refused a helm with an obviously Lannister lion on it, yet he's about to be hanged for his lion association. That's, oh well.
They really just need Gendry to refashion all this good steel.
That's true. That's a couple people in the comments and before the episode were saying they need to have him melt that thing down. Yeah. I wonder if Lem will ever wield a fire sword like Beric did. It would be kind of strange to see the Hound's helm and fire sword used by the same person, although technically speaking, I don't think Sandor was wearing his helmet when he fought his duel with Beric. Anyway, more importantly, Lem tells Thoros, close your eyes then, if what you see, like the helm, frightens him. And that's just, what kind of answer is that? That closing your eyes, they can't do that. You can't, that's not going to make it go away. That doesn't solve the problem. It's really just a pithy way to get out of the conversation, to avoid the issue. Lem is perhaps the best example of how far these men have fallen. The best example, perhaps, of men becoming evil because of their brokenness. There are far worse people than him out there, of course. But most of them were worse to begin with. Lem was maybe never a good man. Maybe he was. I don't know. We don't really know what he was like before. But he followed Beric when Beric was setting a great example. So it goes to show leadership can really matter, especially perhaps a leader like Beric or a leader like Stoneheart, two opposite poles in a lot of ways. Consider that it was Lem who was supposed to be guarding the inn. He took the bait in chasing after Rorge, and Rorge outfoxed him and got to the inn when he wasn't there. So Brienne fought and was horribly wounded, fixing or covering for Lem's mistake. Now, to be fair, Thoros and even Jane Heddle, and probably Gendry as well, don't stand up for Brienne and don't argue to keep her alive. But Lem is eager for Brienne's death. At least Thoros is somewhat ashamed. Somewhat. Though Lem is wearing the helm, Brienne has more in common with Sandor than he does. We've been over that quite a bit off and on during her chapters, but now she can add horrific facial injury to the things they share. They both have probably bone showing through their cheek now. Jack B. Lucky is the one-eyed man present in this scene. He's portrayed as quite murderous now, too. Marwyn is there, too. Remember the Master of Horse from Winterfell's son? No Edric Dane, no Anguy, though, either, remember. Those two are both Dornish. That's maybe part of why they left. Given the benefit of foreknowledge, what's next for Brienne, then? She's forced to lure Jaime to the Brotherhood. Actually, is Anguy Dornish, or is he just from the Dornish Marches? Anyway, he's from the south. Much farther south. So, yeah, I don't think he is. He's from the Dornish Marches. I said that wrong, yeah. What's next for Brienne, then? She's forced to lure Jaime to the Brotherhood? Yeah. I can't really see them killing Jaime, as it seems he's destined to kill his sister. I suppose in a world with The Walking Dead, technically Jaime could kill her as a corpse, but I don't think so. Given the Brotherhood's earlier adherence to trials by combat, this is an extremely popular theory for how Jaime and Brienne might go free, or how one of them might die in captivity. Now, Jaime wouldn't stand a chance against whomever the Brotherhood puts up as a champion, probably Lem in the Hound's helmet. So the theory goes that Brienne will stand as Jaime's champion and defeat Lem, beating two wearers of that helm in a row. Of course, there's a couple problems with this. One, Brienne is horribly weak still. Her arm is broken. I think it's her left arm, but still, she's just horribly wounded. Beating Lem, it could happen for sure, but she's not in great shape for fighting right now. However, that's certainly not the kind of evidence that you would say just cancels the whole theory. On the other hand, too, though, we just quoted Thoros about how they're not so much about justice anymore. Is Jaime really going to get let go by Stoneheart because of a trial by combat? Did none of these other Freys got trials by combat, did they? I just don't know that this is an offer she's willing to make. It looks like a lot of other people aren't willing to make the offer of trial by combat when they have the advantage. Well, why would they risk their advantage on one duel? Same thing goes here. And what about afterwards? Let's say they do survive one way or another. Podrick too, although maybe not Hyle Hunt. I don't have much in the way of notions for what happens after that for any of them as a whole. Certainly there's examples that I can suggest. BWB is difficult to predict. Jaime might have to lead armies against Aegon VI, something like that. Brienne might resume her quest. We have at least two main options. If Littlefinger's plan goes through, Sansa will head to Winterfell to reclaim it at some point. Brienne will certainly hear that. That's going to be widespread news. That's not going to be the kind of thing that goes under the radar. But before that, she might hear of the marriage of Arya to Ramsay, which of course won't be the real Arya. Now that's tricky because Brienne already knows that this is not the real Arya. Jaime's already told her. But what if the Brotherhood hears about this? What if Stoneheart hears about this? And the only person that can tell them it's not the real Arya is Jaime or Brienne. And they already don't trust these two. So that could get all mixed up. Another wrinkle here is that Stoneheart has reason to go to a lot of the same places Brienne does for the same reason, to find Arya and or Sansa. So it's almost strange that they're enemies because, well, it is strange that they're enemies because obviously a lot of it's misunderstanding. But they're also they would be very good allies, or could be, because Brienne is intent on following her quest to the end. She does really want to find Arya or Sansa. So what if Stoneheart goes north for one of these many reasons, or for some other reason? Then all of a sudden, not only can she learn that Sansa's alive, which is probably going to happen one way or another anyway. Well, she knows Sansa's probably alive. She doesn't know where she is. But she might learn that Rickon is alive, and then maybe eventually Arya too. And if she learns that Rickon is alive, that might lead to learning that Bran is alive, or at least that Bran was alive last he saw him and wasn't killed by Theon. Those are huge differences. Now, what is Stoneheart, this revenant of revenge? What does a beast being bent on revenge like that do when the reason for their revenge is not removed? Robb was killed, and she's never going to forget that. But a big thing is changed.
She was killed.
Well, yeah, and she was killed, yeah. She's not going to forget that either, probably. Most dead people do forget that they were killed, though, for lacking memory and all. Yeah. So there's all these big questions of what this undead being is going to do when certain information that she believes to be true turns out to not be true. And when she's perhaps finished dealing with Freys. Maybe she kills the Freys in the south, and that's why she goes north, because there's still a few more up there. Or it's time to go for the Boltons because the Freys are taken care of. Lots and lots of reasons for Stoneheart to go north, though, as you can see. And let's recall George R. R. Martin's original plan for the series. Catelyn was intended to die beyond the wall, not in the Riverlands. So how does that play along with the others? Can they, control her? Or, I don't know. I mean, so this is where we start thinking about strange notions like the Night Queen or corpse brides and things like that. But interestingly, Stoneheart's eyes are red, not blue. So fire white, yeah. This how these things interplay. Your guess is as good as mine, but I am very curious to find out. Either way, though, getting north also brings her in Stannis' vicinity. Not just Stoneheart, but Brienne. Now, if you think killing Stannis is on Brienne's mind as a priority, well, think back to all these chapters. When have we ever talked about that? Basically not at all. We just finished her 8 chapters in A Song of Ice and Fire in A Feast for Crows, and she has not thought about killing him even once. Now, I don't think she's given up on that. She's not the type to give up, let's be honest. But the lack of any sort of burning desire to kill him is not just in plot terms, but in terms of her as a character, is something that's really important to consider what this means. She's not the revenge type. She's the take an oath and fulfill it type, right? Revenge is something else. That's a whole nother thing. But isn't that interesting? She doesn't think of killing him. And literally only once in all her chapters does his name even come up. She does think about not killing Stannis, maybe indirectly, by failing Renly, by not doing anything about it. She's never done anything about that. But that's as close as we get. Certainly doesn't sound like revenge. It's just lamenting Renly. And like I was about to say, the only time Stannis' name comes up at all in any of her chapters is in reference to Gendry and thinking about how Robert's children were bastards. And so Gendry is like, maybe Gendry is the real heir of Robert. And of course, that's not just relevant to Gendry, but the Brotherhood without banners, who considered themselves king's men under Beric. Quote,
"We were king's men when we began," the man told her. "But king's men must have a king, and we have none. We were brothers, too, but now our brotherhood is broken. I do not know who we are, if truth be told, nor where we might be going. I only know the road is dark. The fires have not shown me what lies at its end."
Yeah, isn't that really interesting? So Thoros can look into the flames, but this is not something that he can see. Imagine if they learn, though, that Gendry is Robert's real son. Maybe that will give them a new sense of purpose or a different sense of purpose. Or if not him, Aegon or Daenerys or the coming of the others. They were led well once, and perhaps it can happen again. Stoneheart is not a bad leader, but she's a bad leader. So again, consider the eyes, ruby eyes that shone like two red stars in Oathkeeper and Brienne's own blue eyes. There's lots of Ice and Fire theme type work going on here with the eye colors, as well as some of the other colors. This is reds and blues all over the place. Tully colors, Sansa's hair and eyes, in addition to Oathkeeper and Brienne's eyes. And of course, like I said, there'll be eyes in Cersei's chapter too, but they're entirely different colors. BWB here, they're doing their own kind of sacrifice to the trees. They've always had a little bit of association with the old gods, even though they worship R'hllor, because of, well, they hide under the hills where the children of the forest used to live. Beric used to sit on a weirwood throne, effectively, and while looking like Bloodraven. And, well, we got that same old Odin sacrifice an eye for knowledge thing. We got One-Eyed Jack Be Lucky, and, well, he's one of the guys that that makes the mention here. We always got more trees. And to me, this is like reminiscent of how the ancient Northerners used to sacrifice people to their trees. People being hanged from trees is somewhat similar to that. This is their way of killing. And check out this quote here. This is really something.
The flickering light cast queer shadows. Spirits of the slain, she thought, dancing all about me, hiding when I turned to look at them. Everywhere she saw holes and cracks and crevices, but there was no way to know which passages led out, which would take her deeper into the cave, and which went nowhere. All were black as pitch.
Part of this is her fever dreaming, but it definitely reminds me of the same little piece of business, which is that these used to be Children of the Forest caves. And the caves up north sound like this too, the ones where Bran and his friends are hanging out in. Very similarly described in a lot of ways. So I definitely wonder about that. I really wonder. It feels like a lot of this northern old gods worship is creeping in here and there to these plots, which is really neat, like I said, because he's a R'hllor worshiper. So very interesting overlap. She begs for Oathkeeper, partly because she wasn't allowed a real sword at Harrenhal, partly because she treasures it so much personally, partly because she's just had a near-death experience and was nearly eaten. You tend to want to keep your weapons around you after that. But she only sees ghosts watching. Yeah, so she's killed all these people, and she feels them coming for her again. It's a big weighing down of her. And yeah, like Bo Buckley says, well, like we said back in the Whispers, there's no clean winning in this game. Brienne half returns to the living as she hears voices, and we can ascertain a few things. When at first she thinks it's Sansa because, well, that's part of where her mind is constantly. And this is Willow's older sister, Jane. And that's kind of interesting because she thought of Willow as like Arya. So now she thinks of Jane as like Sansa. So you get this two sisters of similar age to Arya and Sansa, and she thinks of them in pairs like that, lined up. That's pretty cool. Of course, there's a lot of similarities to Merritt Frey's chapter here with the hanging and Stoneheart and the Brotherhood. The line, guest right don't mean so much as it used to, said by this girl, Jane. But mostly, Brienne spends her time talking with Thoros. And he says, for example, another important piece of dialogue, Lord Beric's fire has gone out of this world. A grimmer shadow leads us in his place. And this is finally confirmation for first-time readers that Beric is gone. Perhaps more importantly for second-time readers, third-time readers, rereaders, not just that his fire is gone with him, but the light he cast on the world in need. He was one of the most noble characters we ever met, right? Willing to do more for innocence than almost anyone, maybe anyone. He's in the conversation. It really backs up what we were saying a moment ago. Thoros elaborates further as well, that the Brotherhood was never a company of saints in the first place. Some of them were good, some of them weren't. In the war, in endless killing and dying, you strike here, you strike there, do it all again. It gets to you. You're not living like a normal person. And you lack joy, you have lots of anxiety, you are focused on some of the worst aspects of human existence, killing and survival. people. It's all about these people. And Beric managed to make all of it, to give them all a purpose. He really brought them together and kept them from feeling that suffering because he was able to lift their purpose above their suffering. Now, because their purpose is not noble, I think their suffering has eclipsed their goals. They're still accomplishing both, accomplishing suffering, but one has overtaken the other. They were about justice once. They had one goal. They even had a king that at least they viewed as noble, whose name they could really rally behind. But that's gone, and maybe it will come back, though. It may not be gone forever. There may be justice again. There may be something like that. Justice may return to the realm. And again, remember this, too. It's so much about leadership. Not just Beric leading them well, but Stoneheart leading them kind of evilly, but not entirely evilly. Certainly not as evil as the phrase or what have you. But it is brutal, and this is what they're being led back to. A lot of these broke men who were not so great to begin with, that became pretty decent under Beric, are backsliding again. And Lem is, again, a perfect example. He was following the great leader, and now he's following the murderous leader. Yeah, shows you the power of leadership. It's also a sign of the decline that even Thoros, who seems less gone than the others, is still pretty gone. Podrick being hanged, he's like, yeah, he's a squire, he's a Lannister, etc. This is like a 13-year-old, and he's like, got to do it. So it goes to show even someone like Thoros, some of his sensibilities have fallen off too. Now, Brienne spends most of the first half of the chapter dreaming and fighting literal monsters in her mind. But the second part of the chapter is discovering that, like Thoros says, war has made monsters of otherwise ordinary, even just and good people. They're not monstrous because of their appearance, but because of their willingness to kill someone, clearly intending to do good. I mean, Brienne did good, and they're going to kill her. And Lem's laughing about it. Yeah. It gets harder and harder to defend the Brotherhood's actions. But then again, we go to what they're doing over at Riverrun, and we do find some things to cheer for. It's really beautiful story crafting here. We know the story of Jaime and Brienne. We were there. We know how much this digs at Brienne's soul, this being forced to undermine her own oath, to go against what she believes in, to save someone's life. And, well, that puts her in a spot kind of like Jaime, doesn't it? Isn't that kind of ironic? In order to save Podrick, she had to go against her values. And now she's going to have, in order to save him, she's going to have to go farther with that, because the ordeal is not over. Just like Jaime had to kill Aerys to save people, innocent lives, regardless of the consequences for him. A lot of theories out there that try to get at their future bring that theme into play. I think that's smart to refer to that idea of Brienne following a bit of Jaime's path and becoming a bit like him by having similar experiences. Maybe not becoming like him, but by having similar experiences that they can have balanced against each other and compare to. She said, here's another quote about near the end here with Brienne's awful choice.
She says that you must choose. Take the sword and slay the Kingslayer, or be hanged for a betrayer. The sword or the noose, she says. Choose, she says. Choose.
It's no chance, no choice all over again, one chapter later, right? All of Brienne's arc has been about choice for the most part. It's been a recurring, overwhelming theme, but it's never been so ominous and so difficult and so tragic. Before, she made the tough choice at first. The refuse to die with honor, but instead she has to change her mind. She can't let this happen to Podrick. Brienne's trial before the Brotherhood feels somewhat similar to Tyrion's trial for Joffrey's death, in that it's not so much invented false evidence that dooms them as selective presentation of the truth. And pretty much everything said, not everything said in Tyrion's trial was true. It's just they were leaving out a lot of the circumstances that would completely change it, and leaving out other things that would also change the picture, and leaving out other people who could be accused. Now, yeah, Brienne has a very Lannister-looking sword, and it does look bad, and she does have Tommen's order, and she did call for Jaime, and Podrick was Tyrion's squire, and Hyle was Tarly's bannerman. This is all fair evidence, but the bottom line is what she did for them and what she did as a member of humanity, as a member of society, showing, hey, I'm a good person. I stood against evil when it looked impossible for me to win. That, I think, a lot of kings or queens presented with someone that had done good and bad deeds, someone like Stannis would judge them both and not just, okay, you have to die because of this. Well, I think if this were Stannis, well, maybe Brienne would lose a finger or something and still be allowed to keep going. But this is Stoneheart, and this is a different ball game here. Noga Frankel wants to know, why is Thoros still with the Brotherhood? It's a good question. I mean, he doesn't really have anywhere else to go. I suppose he could go back to Essos, but he feels like following this through. The fire is there. His worshippers, there's worshippers of R'hllor there that he has brought to this religion. I don't think he wants to abandon them. It's not the kind of thing he would do. Derry from the chat says, the fire has passed from Beric to Lady Stoneheart. He feels he's supposed to support her, perhaps, for religious reasons. I think that's pretty strong. Noga Frankel also says, I'm not sure it only matters how he ends is about redemption, more like a fall from grace. Yeah, it's a good point. It's not only about how you end. Certainly that matters more than a lot of other things. But what you do during your life all matters. Again, we come back to Stannis on that one. He's like, the good deeds don't erase the bad, but they do help. Settle in briefly for another tale of the old days, a little anecdote here. Because of her appearance in Jaime's solitary A Dance with Dragons chapter, we know she lives, so presumably the word she screams is sword. But actually, we know for sure it was. It was a matter of debate, though, before A Dance with Dragons, right? Because we didn't know she we didn't know she'd appear in a chapter in A Dance with Dragons before the book came out. So for 5 years between A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons, people were debating what happens there, what word she screamed and all that. Some people wondered if it was a different word. But George did reveal that it was sword, and he did say it was to save Podrick's life. He didn't mention Hyle. So there's a chance Stoneheart's like, yeah, Hyle's still getting hanged. He's not off. So, yeah. So that's pretty neat. Little story from the old days about how this was perceived at the time. Archmaester Rennie says, Elder Brother was wrong. The Hound is not dead. It's just not Sandor anymore. But we know that Elder Brother knows that he made that mistake of leaving the helmet behind. Stefan B. marvels at how the Hound's helmet was just a colorful detail early in the first few chapters originally, and now it's become this thing. Who knew? Who could have seen that coming? Not even George, I don't think. Although maybe George. Brienne is an example of that old saying, no good deed goes unpunished, while Cersei, who we're about to move on to, will be punished too, but for not good deeds. Cersei 10. Help me, Jaime Lannister, you're my only hope, a.k.a. the Sparrow traps the lion. This one really could be called You Reap What You Sow, I suppose, and it starts very similar to how it ends.
Septim Moel was a white-haired harridan with a face as sharp as an axe and lips pursed in perpetual disapproval.
Yeah, she has to face her a lot more after. But Cersei doesn't know, but we rereaders do, that even at this moment, in this first line, Septim Moel probably already knows what Cersei has done. A lot of them are in on having heard Osney's confession, and thus, well, they're all just waiting for their moment to jump on her. Interesting, too, that George has her face as sharp as an axe. There's a little bit, perhaps, of a nod to the ancient history of the Andals and the Seven. It's said that the Andals originated in a feature on Essos called the Axe. They migrated from the Axe to what's now Andalos, and then from Andalos to Westeros, bringing the Seven with them. So maybe that's what he was saying, or maybe it's just coincidence. The notion that Marjorie's maidenhead proves anything is well known to be bunked by Cersei and another of highborn women and men. We brought that up last time. Riding a horse is what takes that away for most any woman who rides a horse is going to have, not have that skin there anymore. It's a very horse riding is it does that. So Cersei doesn't raise this as a defense is one of many signs that she doesn't want Margaery to be seen as innocent. But of course, we don't need any evidence of that. We know this is all very intentional. But it's important to keep that in mind for outsiders, for non-Cersei characters, basically everyone else in the court and council, minus the few others who are in the know or the few that have been spying. It's a signal that something is up. It's a very big deal to have the queen, betrothed queen, accused by the queen regent. It's wild to have these two houses that are a powerhouse alliance going at it. And this is something that never would have happened if Tywin was around, which is one of many things that Cersei fools herself about in thinking she's like her father. But of course, the scandal is deeper because the accusing knight is stated and known to be of Cersei's household, which just adds more drama to the whole affair. A few of the more perceptive nobles would raise an eyebrow at that detail and say, wait, Osney Kettleblack sleeping with Margaery? Huh. Well, that's strange for a number of reasons. Regardless, even those who may have figured it out realize it's a scandal. Even if it's a manufactured scandal, it's a scandal. And upon the pronouncement of court, or in court, of Margaery's shame, a lot of people leave right away. Quote,
A buzz filled the air, as if 1,000 wasps were loose in the throne room. Some of the ladies in the galleries began to slip away, followed by a stream of petty lords and knights from the back of the hall. The gold cloaks let them go, but the queen had instructed Sir Osfried to make note of all who fled. Suddenly, the Tyrell rose does not smell so sweet.
I suppose she assumes those who flee are cynically hanging on to Tyrell power, but many of them are likely leaving because they see this all as a slanderous event and or ridiculous. However, Osfried loses his post in this chapter. He's the head of the Gold Cloaks, but as soon as Cersei's thrown in jail, that ends. And he couldn't have possibly remembered all these people who left since there were so many, and he didn't write them down since he can't write. So this is another example of Cersei giving a task to someone who's not really fit for it, or not understanding what the task calls for. However, surely a few names will be remembered. I don't know if that's going to matter, but something to file away. Cersei takes this moment as victory. Not over just as over Margaery, but over Maggie the Frog. Talk about celebrating too early. All that's happened is the news has been delivered to court. Is that really? And she says, okay, that's it. Marjorie's done. Very much celebrating early. And of course, this chapter is overfilled with irony, something like that, but also other kinds of irony, all flavors of irony. Cersei will later realize how badly she's trapped herself, eventually tasting the irony and realizing it. But first, she starts noticing irony outside of her own situation. Quote.
No, let them shout until they're hoarse. It will not sway the sparrow. He only listens to the gods. There was a certain irony in his highly holiness having an angry mob encamped upon his doorstep, since just such a mob had raised him to the crystal crown.
She won't be able to sway him either. She's not one of the gods, so yet she thinks she's going to. She had the information right there in front of her. Wait a minute. He's not going to listen to me. So many things Cersei intends to trap Margaery or someone else with, trap her instead. It's a huge list. There's the obvious setting her up for sleeping with Osney when she's the one who did so, getting caught when his false confession pivoted to a real confession. Cersei hears Margaery tell her what happened when they captured her, only to see all those same things happen almost the exact same way to her when they capture her. Taking her dress, even her small clothes, sticking her in a small cold cell, waking her every hour and asking her to confess. So just like in Brienne's chapter, we have this trial by battle perhaps foreshadowed. I mean, here it isn't foreshadowed, it's openly discussed. In Brienne's chapter, it's more of a foreshadowing, suggestive thing. Still, very much a mirroring of chapters content here. The irony of the end of this chapter is that while Cersei tried to push Margaery to a trial by combat with the faith, she herself thinks that there is no other option for her. Each of them has a wounded Kingsguard brother to draw upon, but neither of them will actually use their brother as champion against the faith. Yeah, whoops. Treated as a queen in terms of trial by combat, they're both screwed by this lack of champion. Loras being burned, Jaime being handless, Kyborg not in the Kingsguard at all. Again, this is ironic too, because there is a spot open in the Kingsguard, and the Kyborg could be added. Even ignorance of this, though, Cersei is indirectly to blame for. Doran kept Arys Oakheart's death a secret as part of the overall reaction to Myrcella's injury, but also because he learned that Cersei was going to try to murder Trystane and blame it on Tyrion. And that was obviously something he had to deal with. So, she murdered the prior easygoing High Septon because she worried he worked for Tyrion. And this murder is part of Osney's confession to the High Septon now in power because Cersei killed the easygoing one. Ooh. Not just that, but she gave this very dangerous man a ton of power in exchange for debt and a blessing to be crowned for Tommen that still hasn't happened. This was, of course, restoring the faith of their weapons. But she doubles down on that error and this time gets even less of value in exchange.
Perhaps the faith should conduct the trial? The High Sparrow steepled his thin hands.
I have had the self-same thought, Your Grace. Just as Maegor the Cruel once took the swords from the faith, so Jaehaerys the Conciliator deprived us of the scales of judgment. Yet who is truly fit to judge a queen, save the seven above and the God-sworn below? A sacred court of 7 judges shall sit upon this case. 3 shall be of your female sex, a maiden, a mother, and a crone. Who could be more suited to judge the wickedness of women?
That would be for the best.
Look how meek she is. She's going to have to be forced to be meek later instead of making it an act. Nothing is what she gets out of this. She gives away, when she got, like I said, she didn't get enough when she gave them their swords back, but she gets nothing for this. Gives them supreme judicial authority over her family and gives it to a guy who's blatantly and thoroughly misogynist. And I say that in full knowledge of Westeros being extremely misogynist in the first place. This guy is on another level. It's extremely patriarchal religion. The men have way more power than the women, and the women are taught to be silent mostly. So this is what she's empowered. She's a woman, and she's giving this extreme misogynist power over her to treat her with extreme misogyny and extreme prejudice. So this is worse than nothing. This is worse than getting nothing because she gave him things to hurt her with. Foot, I shoot thee. That's Cersei right there. Now, we'd be remiss not to mention Cersei's hubris, too. It's not just all miscalculation. Some of it's just arrogance. Some of it's overconfidence. She thinks she's clever. She thinks she underestimates other people's cleverness, overestimates her own. And it really shows up when she's captured. This is almost wild to me. Quote,
She was not meek, Marjorie Tyrell, to don her little shift and submit to such captivity. I will teach them what it means to put a lion in a cage, Cersei thought.
Yeah, you'll tear your clothing and smash your own toilet. That'll teach them. Cersei should have been thinking of the lion in Casterly Rock that they kept as a pet that was so docile, she stuck her hand in there and it licked it. That is what it means to put a lion in a cage. When you're in a prison, it doesn't matter who you are powerless. You can be the most powerful person in the world or the weakest, and your situation is similar, depending on what's going on outside. Speaking of outside, she thinks her escort will come to rescue her, but guess who leads her escort? The aforementioned Boros Blunt, who she just laughed about herself. She thinks, this guy responsible for guarding me and my son, who is very important to me, is so terrible at fighting that he cannot defend Marjorie. That'll teach him. When Qyburn shows up, he informs her that she's to be tried by the same court she herself set up, and finally she starts to realize a lot of the irony here, and that her counsel has mostly turned on her and or fled, except good old torture necromancer friend here, Qyburn. He sticks around. It's good to have one or two friends you can always count on. Orion Water seems to have become a pirate on Torture's Deep, one of the Stepstones, and calls himself Lord of the Waters. And of course, we've been talking about this coming for a while, and now Cersei finally gets to experience it. She says, "My Lord Father said not to trust bastards." Now, this harkens back to Rhaenyra, who is a huge parallel to Cersei, who was led to mistrust some of the bastards that were serving her, and this caused a whole to-do, caused her own civil war. think of how Rhaenyra pushed away the Valarians, their most powerful ally, and here you have Cersei pushing away the Tyrells, their most powerful ally, and it was partly over similar issues. She sends away Alan and forces Adam Oakenfist away. Adam of Hull was his prior name. He was legitimized. And he proved to be super loyal. Meanwhile, the rest of this fallout was really bad for Rhaenyra. Now, the title for the Lord of Driftmark is Lord of the Tides. And so this guy calling himself Lord of the Waters is a clue that it is Aurane. Now, also, another really funny thing about Cersei's saying not to trust bastards and how that your own kids are bastards, Cersei. Somehow, it's amazing when people can be that hypocritical, but it isn't unrealistic. There are plenty of people in the real world that are that hypocritical, that they can sit here and accuse people of the exact thing they're guilty of with full belief in their rightness in the situation.
Yeah, like you about people being hypocrites.
What am I a hypocrite about? About everything?
Being a hypocrite.
Okay, yeah. I'm a hypocrite about being a hypocrite. Rhaenyra also had trouble with a religious zealot leader, the Shepherd. He preached against dragons, took power in the former dragon pit, which was on one of the hills. This is the other of the main hills, Rhaenys' Hill, Visenya's Hill, right? So, lots of parallels there. We'll talk about that more in our Dance of the Dragons coverage, bringing it back to Cersei when we can. So I want to know if Taena and Orton Merryweather knew what would happen at the Sept, or suspected it, or fled immediately upon hearing about it. Maybe they were like wary and they were keeping an eye on the situation, prepared to react one way or the other, or they were part of setting it up. This is a difficult choice here. Alla is another part of this. Alla Tyrell is the one that Taena says she can turn and get to accuse against the others. Now, this is curious to me. Nina's on team Taena works for the Tyrells. I've been pushing Taena works for Varys. Now, it doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be multiples, right? Taena can work for multiple parties. She can spy for multiple groups. The Kettleblacks are doing it pretty blatantly. And it's by no means a precedent when they did it. They're not super spies or anything. So it could be a little of both, or I could just be wrong about the Varys thing. What Nina says here is that because of this suggests some of that Tyrell connection, going to talk to Alla and getting her to agree with Cersei because she's in on it, maybe, right? Telling them how this is all going to go down, explaining what they're doing to Cersei. And of course, they would all love to take down Cersei, I would guess. All these Tyrell cousins, because of she's been awful to them, and now even more awful. Cersei thinks about how the Faith are carrying staves and not swords, and she can't decide whether that's wise or foolish, but she's missing the point. It's religious. It's part of their beliefs. They're not supposed to shed blood at the Sept. That was the whole problem with Ned's execution there. It was profaned with blood. So staves are the weapon of choice when you're trying, or a weapon of choice, a valid selection when you don't want to use blades. Think of Vace Dothrak, right? Strangulation and blunt force rather than drawing blood. Now, perhaps I'm beating a dead horse or lion. Well, that sounds cool. Okay, stay on topic. No going into a rabbit hole about horse lions. Cersei doesn't like rules. She doesn't like rules at all. There's so many rules here. She wants to rule, but without rules. She wants to be unrestrained. She wants rules to apply to other people. This is that same sort of hypocrisy we were just discussing about in terms of her blaming people for thoroughly and emphatically for things she's guilty of, and it not being an act. But think ahead to how she will be subjected to all kinds of restrictions in addition to her walk of penance. Like she's going to have like Septas sleep in her bed with her and do prayer every morning. All these rules and hoops she's going to have to jump through. It's going to be awful for her. Kevin, in his chapter, is going to think about how much calmer and humbler she is, even though he's wary of that. And right to be so. It's interesting that George takes her POV away for a while so that we're left to wonder if perhaps this change isn't genuine. But I try to leave room when it comes to theories and uncertain situations. You gotta be reasonable about these things. You gotta leave room to be wrong. We can't be so arrogant. But this is one of those times where I have a lot of confidence, and I suspect a lot of you do as well, that Cersei will not ever be the meek, humble on the inside. She may put that act up and keep it up for a while. So whatever, if Kevin is perceiving this calm or humble or Cersei that he hopes is maybe legit, but there's no way. Cersei will hate what's been done to her, and she will have her revenge, and she will be less restrained afterwards, I believe. There will be no more rules, not religious rules designed to control women, especially not the queen. You know who else entirely lives outside the rules, who lives outside the box, who breaks every rule, every tradition, every tenet of society? Nothing is sacred. Euron. We've been going on and on about how these two have so much in common. The show brought them together, and how some people doubt that'll happen in the books, but not me. And that's part because of the similarities between them. They are a good fit personality-wise, in my opinion. I'm no expert matchmaker, especially not among villains. Now, where the theories are not as certain, Cersei seems to have gone down in part because of Varys, and reinstalled because of Varys. That makes her his tool. So another person that she's working for without realizing it, that she's working on his behalf without knowing so. But if we're giving Varys too much credit, again, I could be wrong about the Varys tiny connection. He's still working behind the scenes, and she is still an effective tool for his goals, even if he's not guiding her. Maybe he's just lucky to have a Cersei out there doing the kind of things that are helping him without him needing to make her do them. But I tend to think he's helping her along. Joe Buckley also takes note of how incredibly blissful and blissed out Cersei feels when she arrests Marjorie. Like, what a thing to feel good over. All this is her victory. She's happiest when she's succeeded with this evil plan. But on the other hand, part of her happiness is because she thinks Tommen is safe. Now that's something that we have to consider very strongly, because it's easy to hate Cersei, but she is a mother, and a lot of mothers in this world, we've all had one, whether we met them or not. And mothers' love for their kids is something to be reckoned with, even with Cersei. And while she has all these other things, ambition, hubris, lust for power, greed, hypocrisy, there does seem to be some love for her child, even as she treats that child poorly in a number of ways. And poorly might be underselling it, but you get the point. So she thinks she's beaten Maggie the Frog, too. And she cries when she sees Tommen playing with his fishing rod with the cats, and because she feels, he's safe now, and it's a relief. So that's how you know, that's part of the evidence that you know it's genuine on her part. Those tears were real. And she even though she's trying to cover them up. She thinks to herself, Jaime always said that the hardest part of any battle is just before, waiting for the carnage to begin. That's more irony, because this is what she thinks before going into the Sept. She's not actually thinking it's going to be a battle, but it does kind of turn out to be. She's like got to fight the Septas, who, these old women that she thinks have no power over her. But when there's a bunch of them, and Cersei, you're not exactly much of a warrior yourself. You never, as you lament yourself, they didn't let you learn how to wield a sword when you were younger. So she's going to be, look at these eyes. This is something really interesting to me that stands out. It's very symbolic, very meaningful, and it takes us to a couple of different rabbit holes, I think. Here's the quote.
The faces of the seven had been carved into the walls. Cersei thought the carvings crude and ugly, but there was a certain power to them, especially about the eyes, orbs of onyx, malachite, and yellow moonstone that somehow made the faces come alive.
Statues with gemstone eyes have been a thing in all the books, whether they're in Vaes Dothrak, whether they're in a little sept that the Brotherhood without banners saves from the bloody mummers who were stealing said gemstones, whether Dany's ancient ancestors, perhaps all the way back from the Great Empire of the Dawn, all the various colored eyes of the Targaryens and the Valyrians and all that business, even the Lannisters and their unusual eyes. Here we have distinct green, black, and yellow. Orbs of onyx. Malachite. Malachite is green. Very, very green. And yellow moonstone. Well, green and black. Here we go. Dance of the Dragons, right? Those are the colors of the Dance of the Dragons. Cersei has a lot of Rhaenyra vibes in this chapter. It would be interesting to really go through each Cersei chapter and see which king or queen she most resembles in that chapter. We've at times had her like Robert, a lot had her like Aerys, talked about Maegor and foreshadowed more Maegor. Now here we have Rhaenyra all over this chapter. Very interesting. And Rhaenyra's downfall was pretty savage too. Of course, Cersei's own eyes, the Lannister eyes themselves, the green eyes, that is of interest as well. Certainly it comes up in Jaime's chapter when he dreams or sees their mother. Now, I also think this is tied to her hubris. She sees the gods and she sees they're crude and ugly, but notices the power they have. And this also reflects on the power that the faithful have, that the power of the Septon, of the High Sparrow, rather, and that she's not realizing how strong it is here. And it's part of her hubris and part of her perhaps thinking herself as powerful as a god, which is something Dany doesn't exactly do, but thinks, is this how a god feels? You know, when they're this lonely? And it's a very different set of feelings, but it's similar set of circumstances where they're alone and kind of isolated, and a woman in a world that tends to want to be ruled by men, things like that. Now, she talks to Marjorie briefly. Now, even though nothing incriminating is said directly, the fact that they discuss the Kingsguard at all, and that Marjorie's like, yeah, this isn't going to work. Like, Boros, Meryn, if the High Sparrow is listening to that, then it matters a lot, because Cersei then goes to the High Sparrow and is like, we got to make sure the Kingsguard are the defenders here, right? And he's like, yeah, definitely. So if he had heard them talking about it, he would just be like, yes, they're just, again, hoisting themselves by their own petard here. Yeah. It's also another example of Cersei's over reliance or favoring or the value she puts on beauty. Someone like Olenna said, I hope I taught my Marjorie what beauty is worth. But Cersei has not learned that lesson. She looks down on the old shriveled, feeble women, looks down on these statues of the gods because they're crudely carved. She looks down on so many things because of what they look like or because of their station. And, well, all around beauty is being destroyed in this story, and I wonder if Cersei's will be among that. Probably not. She's just going to be ugly on the inside until she dies. And it shouldn't be ignored, too. Good catch by Joe here, that as Cersei is being taken down into the tunnels, because remember, the Sept is on a hill, and below the hill are tunnels. And there's also, at the base of the hill, the Pyromancers and their tunnels. Again, I don't know if those connect, but it's really worth thinking about. But that's another point for later. Right now, it's neat to know that as she's going down into the heart of the hill, Brienne did the same thing, going down into the caves. Both of them for the purpose of being judged, and both of them are quite bewildered about it. Before Cersei is captured, though, well, here's the moment where it all turns.
I must return to the castle. With your leave, I will take Ser Osney Kettleblack back with me. The small council will want to question him and hear his accusations for themselves.
No,
said the High Septon.
And this no, it's so well written how it affects her, because Cersei is so unused to hearing that word from pretty much anyone, with the occasional exception of, say, Jaime or Tommen, who she just lords over him and makes him say yes, or say Marjorie or maybe Olenna. But these are other powerful people who are close to her, people who are in her family, people she has like personal relationships with. This, though, is just a big splash of icy water to the face. And it's just a great, simple, powerful. Like, never has the word no been so powerful in a scene that I can think of. To have it here, just jarringly simple, as Joe puts it. I like that way. I like writing it that way. Jarringly simple. She's got this dream day where everything's going right. She's gotten Marjorie accused in front. The reaction was what she hoped for. Things are going pretty well. She's floating on the clouds, right? She's super happy, but then boom, it all comes crashing down. The queen is above everyone in her mind. The highborn's above the low. You just don't say no. That's the way it's always been. She's never really thought about it that much. It's just how it's always been, as this person of extreme privilege, of being highborn, being the queen. No, she just doesn't hear that word. And we talked as recently as last chapter about how people just don't refuse her. Even Orton Merriweather's like, yeah, I don't want to be your hand, but I'll be your hand. He doesn't say that. He's like, yes, of course I'll be your hand. But we can tell he doesn't want to be. And he runs away as soon as the job gets tough, which is soon after he's named. So here it is. In her finale, thrown right back at her. Someone finally says no to her. A very easy no, but she never saw it coming, in part because it didn't cross her mind, really. I mean, she considered ways this might not work out perfectly, but she did not consider this very basic and simple just refusal. It didn't occur to her that the guy would just say no. It didn't occur to her that she gave him so much power. She gave him so much power that he can say no to her. That's part of the surprise for her, that it's not just that she's not used to this, it's that she's realized that not only is he saying no, he's saying no because I empowered him to say no. Without this without the scales of justice being returned to them, without the ability to rule over the royal family and give judgment, they couldn't do this. She walked in the door, gave them the power to hold her, and they held her. We've had a princess in a tower, this time a queen. Yeah. She's so happy about what she did to Marjorie and has it all happen to her. And this, as he is showing her Osney, we see that, oh my God, this guy is even more out there than we thought. He enjoys being whipped. This guy is quite possibly a masochist, if not a little off, or both. And he thinks torture can provide good results, which is, we know that's not true. In this case, it is. Osney did tell the truth. But we know in a lot of cases, as it was brought up in Jaime's chapter, or will be brought up in Jaime's chapter next, in his right next up, that, Blackfish probably didn't tell people where he was going to go. So what good would it do to torture them? They might just tell us false information to make the torture stop. And then what good is that going to do? You've tortured someone and you got the wrong information. So yeah, it's really quite gruesome to see how much torture has been in Cersei's arc, but how much of it she herself has enabled. She gave the power of justice and thus torture to this man. She did the same with Qyburn and so many others. Now you can see in this book that Cersei is setting herself up for a fall, because so much arrogance, so many bad decisions, but this type of fall, maybe not. Maybe you didn't see this exact thing coming, this type of fall coming when you read this book for the first time. It might have seemed like she was heading to her death. But as we outlined last time, I think this is just the beginning. This is a setback. She's taken away from her privilege and power, but she had so much of it that she's able to get some back. Other events conspire to make this more possible for her, like perhaps Varys working behind the scenes to make sure she gets back on the throne, to keep that chaos rolling, to make things easier for her or for him to invade with his squad of young Griff. So it's still a really interesting twist, but it's a double twist because this is not her end. This is her setback, her great setback that changes her outlook, that changes her approach. I think we're going to see that more brutal and bloody and more direct Cersei. Some people disagree with me and think that she's going to be more cunning and more careful. Maybe a little of both. Maybe when she is cunning, she's more cautious about it. Maybe being brutal will allow her to set up a shield of cunning. If someone's just always blunt and brutal, you don't necessarily expect them to be cunning. So, little misdirection potentially. We'll see. So Qyburn has been dismissed from the council, though he technically keeps his job working with the Whisperers. Harry Swift and Pycelle are still there, but are working for themselves, not in her interest, which is another irony because she took Harry Swift on her council to make him a hostage. And now he's like, you put someone on your council as a hostage? That's a pretty high position for a hostage. And now that's burning her as well. There's so many things that burn her that it's hard to keep track of them all of her own making. Now, of course, the gold cloaks are gone, stripped from Osney Kettleblack. Orton and Taina just ran off to the long table. And she sees this as good news because they know things that can incriminate her, even though Orton should be there fighting on her behalf because he's her hand of the king. But, nope. And of course, Aurane Waters, she's like, oh boy, we covered that already. she finally understands the mistake she's made there. Mace is going to leave Storm's End to come back. That's not revealed here, but it's presumed, and yes, it does happen. Randall Tarley leaves Maidenpool. All this stuff happening with the trial. Yeah, that's part of why Randall Tarley is named Master of Laws. He swears to hold on to the cousins and keep them safe and bring them to trial. Now, maybe it's getting a little far afield, but if he's working for Aegon, he might keep those Tyrells as hostages. Anyway, it's not surprising Pycelle's working against her either. I mean, she's treated him horribly, forced him to lie, forced him to embarrass himself, forced him to go against his oaths. And yeah, so basically everyone in her council, except the worst guy, has turned on her. And Kevin, when Kevin comes to speak with her in her captivity, he's like, don't speak about anything important, because he too realizes they're probably listening, and he's more aware of it than Cersei has been. But he does take her advice to appoint the Kyberg to the Kingsguard. He does go along with that suggestion, which Cersei is emphatic about. And well, that's going to be interesting, but we will talk about that later. And now she's found back to the current time, the current chapter. She's left with one choice, the original choice, the one she's been choosing her entire life, as Joe writes. That's a good way to put it. She says, she thinks, come at once, help me, save me. I need you now as I have never needed you before. I love you. I love you. I love you. Come at once. And she, again, just like people never say no to her, Jaime always comes for her. That's not what I meant. But this time, it's not going to happen. He's not going to come for her. And he's gonna come for Brienne. Nina writes how another piece of irony here is that this is very much like Tywin in one way, which is the double dealing, meaning lying to someone's face, not being that this has nothing to do with me. It's like, I'm not responsible for this thing that I'm arguing against, like him complaining about the damage done to the Riverlands, or the justice denied to Doran for the murder of Elia and her children, which he perpetrated. I mean, wow. So Cersei is more like her father than she thinks, but not in the ways she wants to be like him. She didn't realize that her father was such a double dealer. That's never crossed her mind that he was dishonest like that. She thinks Tywin was honest. A lot of people think Tywin was fairly honest, which is, to anyone who's read the series a couple times is like, no, Tywin is very much not honest. He's pretty good at seeming honest. That indeed he is. He is good at seeming honest. He has that reputation, but not amongst readers. Note again that Pycelle never says he was making moon tea for Marjorie to use on herself, just that she asked for it. Now everyone assumes the Septons, the Septas, a lot of people at court assume it was for her. Marjorie, even in talking to Cersei, seems to indicate just indirectly that it was. And she's like, if they're gonna try to get my cousins to lie about me, now maybe she knows who's listening and she's saying the right things. But again, we don't need to get back into that again. It's very, very, very unlikely that Marjorie used it for herself. Super chat from the Purple Lord, Leo Anansi. Do you think that Cersei thinking the faith was weak was warranted, or yet another of Cersei's insistent mistakes? Well, the thing is, she just didn't notice how they changed. They were weak. At the beginning of this book, they were weak. They have gained a lot of power, and the reason she should be very aware of it is that no one has been more responsible for giving them power than her. With the possible exception of the commoners putting the High Sparrow up in the first place. Well, that's not one individual person, though. In terms of individuals, Cersei by far has the most to do with raising him up. With respect to theories behind the scenes of, say, I don't know, maybe someone like Varys is lit a spark under all this or something. Maybe he's a catalyst, but I don't know. Cersei should know more, though, because she was more responsible. Amy Blackfire with Super Chat says, sad to see Feast go, but can't wait for Dance with Dragons. Long live Valar Rereadis. Yeah, thanks for saying that, Amy. Appreciate it. One day, after the Winds of Winter, we'll come back and do it again. Maybe not the whole series, but we might do the Feast Dance order. Some people wanted us to do that. It was a tough decision to keep the books separate. It was I strongly considered it, but life is long, and we'll be coming back years from now. That might be the way to do it. Also, super chat from New Dad Podcast says, taking a quick break from the Goofy movie with Shep to pop in and share some love and support. Appreciate it very much. I bet Shep's loving that Goofy movie. I'm a big fan of Goofy. He was my favorite back in the day. Good doggo that he is. More of the you reap what you sow. Osney being whipped, very similar to how Alayaya was whipped. She who scarred his cheek. And I suppose he will be killed as he killed, because, he killed the High Septon. He's set to be executed. I wrote up a whole bunch of details that connect Osney Kettleblack to Ned Stark. It's pretty funny to think about. They're not very similar people, but there's a lot of similar details. I post those things on Twitter and on our Discord, so check that out later, because I'm not going to talk about it right now because of time purposes. But I do want to say that the point for this is that Osney and Ned Stark, being so different people, they still, no matter what kind of person you are, working with Cersei, working near Cersei, being in Cersei's orbit, is dangerous as hell. Whether you're with her or against her, she ruins it all. She's Ned, meh. Osney helping her out, nah, doesn't go well for either of them. Isabel Harper says, I think the Moontie was for Eleanor. When talking to Cersei, she mentions Alla and Mega are innocent, but doesn't say Eleanor. Oh, very good catch. I did not see that. I don't think Joe or Nina saw that either. So really good. We'll have to look into that again.
Nina did, in fact, mention that in the notes.
Oh, whoops.
Just
I missed
FYI.
it. I missed that in Nina's note. Nina gives a lot of notes. Occasionally I miss something. Well, my apologies. Nina did catch that. So then Joe and I did not catch that then. And it did seem like a pretty good catch. That seems like that might be evidence that it is Eleanor. But it's also, if that's the case, then Marjorie's sort of backing her up. Maybe not by leaving her name out there, but isn't exactly throwing her under the bus either. Stefan B wants to know, how did Qyburn get visitation if he's not on the council anymore? Well, they were allowing Cersei one visitor a day later. Before that, it was like one a week maybe or something like that. But I think it might be for intrigue purposes. They might want to hear what Qyburn says to her. They want to let them have that conversation so they can get secrets out of it. All right. Now, Jaime 7, Goldenhand, the just say no to Cersei, a.k.a. the one where Blackfish escapes, Brotherhood infiltrates. It's also the one with Jaime's ghost mom and an overwhelming amount of irony, not unlike Cersei's chapter. Quote,
the new Lord of Riverrun was so angry that he was shaking.
Yeah, it's the same recurring theme from a different form. I guess you could call it a type of irony, maybe, where Jaime says one thing and thinks the opposite. I called it playing a role at the time, but it's also just showing that Jaime is having to be a person he's really not anymore, or playing a role, etc. He tells Aemon Frey confidently that he'll capture the Blackfish, but internally he's like, I don't know about catching the Blackfish. That's a good example of that, saying one thing and thinking another. One exception to this whole thing of telling one thing and saying another is he tells his aunt that torturing soldiers to get info on where the Blackfish went is pointless. He really does mean that. Now, he could be wrong, but I don't think he is. And he did make a promise not to do so, and he likes to not break his promises, even though he does break some. He still thinks he didn't bear arms against the Tullys, but I think that is an incorrect technicality of on his part, but whatever. Jaime knows he can't rely on the help of the Riverlords to help find Brynden, and that's part of why he's thinking it's kind of hopeless, because they're more likely to help Brynden than turn him in, and just the dishonor it would do to a Riverlord to turn on Brynden Blackfish of all people. I mean, that is just so dishonorable. They would not want to do that. They certainly don't want to be in a position where they have to make that choice either. Interesting, too, Jaime thinks the garrison is too large. I think maybe that he's going to, retrospect, say, okay, maybe it wasn't large enough, because we know that there's a very good chance The place is going to be infiltrated from the inside. Well, we know for sure it's been infiltrated. The result of that infiltration is not as certain. Now, this is really interesting because Jaime was cautious, really cautious with his army in bringing it towards River Run, sending scouts out and all that. But he didn't expand on that level of thinking. The Blackfish escaping was something he should have considered. The frustration he feels towards Edmure at Blackfish getting away is at least partly projection. He knows he and his own men screwed up. He knows this was preventable. He knows it was a oversight. And he really knows how capable the Blackfish is. So this is, as Joe puts it, properly messes things up. And no wonder he's in a bad mood, which helps him perhaps with fuels his threats to Edmure, because we know that a lot of these threats are over the top. Jaime isn't necessarily willing to do them, although maybe he is because he wants to back up his words, but he's relying on the words working. And he's thinking in his mind, maybe Brendan's going to show up with a bunch of outlaws behind him, and maybe some of these men that are in the garrison that are being sent home are going to be part of it. He's 100% sure the Blackfish is not done fighting, which, yeah, absolutely. And Jenna reminds Emmon that, look, this is your castle. You have to hold it. Don't be begging other people. Don't be yelling, no one can take my castle. Do it, man. Just do it. Don't yell about it. Don't talk about it. He's not going to do it. And this brings us back to the point Jaime made at Derry about Arthur Dayne. Succeeding in this area, succeeding here is going to mean making friends with small folk, making them like you, bringing them over to you. And this is clearly not going to happen. Emmon does not have this attitude, does not have this skill. He's too paranoid, too untrustworthy, and too snooty towards with regards to station. He's not going to be nice to small folk. And Jenna, unfortunately, as funny as she is, doesn't seem like she's going to be much better. She's the one who suggests torturing some of the soldiers, after all. So I wouldn't look to her for progressive thoughts on this either. So they're just going about it all wrong. And Jaime doesn't even really bother to tell them what the right way is because, I don't know, his heart's not fully in it, even as though his pride is, but his heart isn't. Speaking of Jenna, backing up a little bit, speaking of the food, it's a really well-supplied castle. That's something that's important. Blackfish stashed lots of food there. Well, that makes them a target, right? We just talked about how food is becoming scarce. It's snowing at the end of this chapter. Well, not only did the Brotherhood want to get inside the River Run to kill those Freys and Lannisters, they want that food. Or at least it's a big bonus to the mission. So now, speaking of Jenna again, I think he's kind of accidentally playing matchmaker here. Check out this quote.
"You should get on famously with my aunt," said Jaime. "If you hope to winter here, see that your playing pleases Lady Jenna. She's the one that matters."
And, well, he's not wrong. She is the one that matters as far as the decision-making go. Now, he's talking to Tom O'Sevens here, of course. And both of these characters, Tom O'Sevens and Jenna, are said to sleep around. Jenna, when she was introduced, there was a suggestion that she's had other lovers and that Emmon is just too weak-willed to do anything about it, to step up. And Tom O'Sevens is absolutely a womanizer. In fact, he's very likely had Lady Smallwood as a lover for a while. So he's even had highborn women as lover before. So this is very much set up. And so I think Jen is the cat's paw, the lion's paw for Tom's activities with the Brotherhood and the reason that it's all going to fall apart for them. Speaking of the Brotherhood, on the outside, though, that's the inside. There's a lot of foreshadowing in this chapter that something is going to go down with Forley Prester's train headed west. Forley Prester is a candidate to be the POV in The Winds of Winter for the prologue. We know the prologue is going to cover this general plot line of the train headed west with Jane and Edmure and Forley Prester. So he is a candidate to be the POV since we know Jane Westerling is not. So he thinks to himself, Jaime does, that Lord Beric may try to free Edmure before they reach the Golden Tooth, which would also be perhaps along with Brynden Tully. I'm reminded of the very wise character Dave from The Flight of the Conchords, whose negotiating strategy was very simple for him to put it. He said, when they make an offer, I say double it again. And that's what Jaime does here with the escort of Forley Prester, because he thinks 100 men. He's like, yeah, 100 men should do it. Then he's like, no. The more he thinks about Brynden and Beric and Stoneheart and all the animosity towards him and his men, he's like, okay, double it. And then he's like, no, double it again. So he goes from 100 to 200 to 400, and he's still worried. And I'm going to guess that 400 still isn't enough. But he doesn't really have much more than that. So he really couldn't have gone much higher than that. He left with about 1,000 men, sent 400 of them there, left roughly 200 at River Run, although maybe not all 200 of those were his. I don't know. But he only has a few hundred as he's going home. And, well, that doesn't end up mattering since Brienne cons him away from those. Anyway, the point is, Forley Prester's group of 400 that contains Edmure and Jane Westerling, be very aware that something is like to happen before they get to their destination. So let's talk about Jane and Sybil. First, Jane we last saw saying goodbye to Robb thrice as he left River Run. Since then, not unlike Catelyn, for a while, Catelyn was cooped up having to hear about everything and being kind of cut off from news and no one wanting to talk to her. I'm guessing Jane wasn't eager to go talking to other people herself, and her mother and she don't get along so well right now for obvious reasons that are entirely one-sided. Good connection with this being next to a Cersei chapter, given that Sybil is Maggie the Frog's granddaughter. If only Jaime knew how much of his life had been shaped by a relative of the woman in front of him, right? He has no idea Cersei's done so much because of Maggie the Frog's prophecy, how much this drives her. And it's just such a strange little connection that it's this same woman, his daughter is over here, daughter and granddaughter and all that, and great-granddaughter. So very funny little connection there. He also has the uncomfortable, important questions, whether Jane is carrying Robb's child. It's an important layer relating to a lot of other of the same plot lines tied together here. Edmure's child with Rosalind is really important here. There's vibes of Jon Snow and Aegon VI here, talking about, you never know, you got to make sure that the king or the queen didn't have some other kid out there somewhere. And that's exactly describes Jon Snow and Aegon VI, right? Rhaegar did have another kid out there. Oh man, we thought that kid was dead. Rhaegar had 2 kids. Wait, one's not really his kid and one is? What the hell's going on here? And Jane, shades of Lyanna, right? Loses, marries a prince or king, similar. Rhaegar was going to be king and loses this child. One is because Lyanna herself dies. The child is lost that way because she doesn't get to have a life with it. In this case, the child is taken from Jane before it's ever born by these abortion drugs she's been given, or these, maybe abortion drug isn't the right word because it prevents conception from happening in the first place, which is different than drinking moon tea. Either way, whatever this thing she was drinking was, it probably was taught to Sybil from Maggie the Frog, right? Like, she was the expert on such things. It's probably like some family recipe. So even that has a connection to all that. So another thing tying Jaime and Cersei's plots together, even in ways they don't see. And Jaime just hates Sybil. Pretty much everyone does, right? And it's hard to imagine a reader going, oh, I like this woman. And selling out her daughter, helping the slaughter happen. Yeah, send your daughter to the slaughter. That was an Iron Maiden song. And complain that the benefits she received aren't good enough. She's like, I did all this and this is all I get. For one thing, she wants something for Rolf Spicer, and Rolf Spicer gets Castamere. It's not a great seat because of what happened to it, but if you don't own land, now you have an old castle that you can do something with. That's a pretty big jump up in terms of power and society, social standing. So they should be pretty happy with that, but no, she's like, she wants more. She wants things for her other kids. She doesn't seem bothered about Jane, though. She wants things for Rollum and Reynauld for marriages, and now those 2 kids are all right, but now this is what she says about them. Consider the wording here very particularly.
Mention. Yeah, this is it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mention was made of a match for him as well, a bride from Casterly Rock. Your Lord Father said that Reynold should have joy of him, if all went as we hoped.
So Nina breaks this down for us. This is probably a good example of Tywin's double dealing again. So it's amazing how much Tywin is coming into these chapters today when he's been dead for a whole book. So the word joy is lowercase here, but when Tywin said it at the time, he probably meant it uppercase, knowing that she would take it as joy, meaning the emotion, but he means Joy, the natural daughter of his brother, meaning bastard daughter, of course. And so Sybil's all excited about marrying an actual Lannister of Casterly Rock, which she is the child of an actual Lannister of Casterly Rock, but not technically a Lannister because of the birth rules and all that. So what Nina thinks might have happened is that Tywin knew Sybil would balk at this. So he double dealt here as well, because Joy Hill was also set to marry a natural son of Walder, which that's more what you see these noble families do. You marry a bastard to another bastard. But so that was probably what Tywin planned on doing. And if Sybil just balked in general and was like, you promised me this and that, what's she going to do about it? She's going to take what she gets and just shut up, because this is Tywin we're talking about. She's not going to push back too hard against him. But against Jaime, she's willing to, argue a bit more. But Jaime isn't having it either, and he says this.
No more than I want Joy to marry the son of some scheming turncoat. I'm so sorry. Okay. No more than I want Joy to marry the son of some scheming turncloak bitch. She deserves better. Your daughter is worth 10 of you, my lady.
And you really held it there.
I couldn't bring myself to say the cuss word on the stream. I'm so used to trying to keep myself from swearing.
I think that one's okay.
Okay.
I may still bleep
again,
it for the pod. But
bitch again?
bitch again. Jaime's reasons for disliking Sybil, as I said, take your pick, so many of them, but it's actually really deep, because she's so much like Cersei. And Jaime, it's his perspective that's so warped, because he grew up with Cersei. He's got all these feelings towards her, so he can't judge Cersei the way he judges Sybil at a distance. But it's just so clear. And at the same time, he has this powerful and regard and respect for Jane. He appreciates her devotion, the kind of devotion she had for Robb Stark. He can respect that. And more, I think he wants it. He wants Jaime to be like Jane. I'm sorry. Jaime wants Cersei to be like Jane, but she's Sybil Spicer. An example comes here. He found himself wondering if Cersei would tear her gown if she should ever hear that he was dead. Well, she did just tear up her shift when captured by the Faith, but that's not quite the same thing. But it's as close as you're going to get, Jaime. He found himself wondering. Now, the answer is no. Cersei hates getting her gowns dirty or torn. She didn't want to kneel in front of the High Septon because of, I don't think so. So Jane is, as Nina writes, a tragic but admirable figure. Lots of love for Jane, not just from Nina, from Joe, from a lot of you guys in the comments and Flick and Facebook. Just feeling for her. Again, kind of like how people felt for Catelyn. It's similar-ish, the kind of things they went through, being isolated, losing their husband, and not getting any apparent justice for it, getting treated badly by their own family, etc. She's had no word, too, on her brother's fate. That's another thing that's kind of like what happened with Catelyn, not with her brother, but with other pieces of her family, her other children. She doesn't know what happened with Sansa, doesn't know what happened with Arya. Here, they don't know what happened to Reynold Westerling, who almost certainly died. He was shot trying to help Grey Wind. But they don't know. They never got the word of that. And Jane is supposed to sit here thinking, my mom arranged for this? To kill my child, to kill my husband, to send my brothers into danger by making a deal with the devil, Tywin Lannister. Like, why would you think this would go well? I don't know. So many reasons for Jane to be upset. And Nina also writes about this contrast. Jane's also an important contrast to Cersei. Jane is pretty enough for a child, but not a girl to lose a kingdom for. This sentiment is repeated a few times in a few different places that people don't get it. I mean, Jaime, my friend, you quite possibly are going to lose everything of yourself because of a woman, your sister, the same woman that you're thinking of, that you're comparing her to. He literally gave up his rights to Casterly Rock for her. he gave up, maybe not a kingdom, but pretty close. So he's close to getting it, but he doesn't understand, partly because his own notions of love and relationships are all mixed up. I mean, Jaime has not ever had a normal relationship. Not that Robin Jane's is terribly normal, but it's a hell of a lot more normal than, growing up with your sister and having a relationship with her. That's the real outlier here. So constantly Jaime and Cersei struggle with perceiving what normal relationships should look like. And so he has these high-minded ideals, in part because he's a knight, he's grew up with stories like this, in part because he doesn't know better, in part because he wants more, because when he really thinks about it, Cersei's not a good lover / girlfriend or whatever. So it's definitely a lot of projection too, that he wishes she was decent or more like this Jane person who was like all the ideals of a devoted queenly wife Jane has here. And Jaime very much respects it. So there's a theory that popped up a while back. It still pops up occasionally. It's called the hips don't lie theory. And it's one of those sarcastic names because, in fact, Jane's hips do lie. The problem comes with different descriptions of Jane Westerling's hips. One has it look like good childbearing hips, and another, Jaime says, narrow hips. Some people took that to mean that she's pregnant, or that it's a different person, rather, that Jane has been switched. A Jane swapping. Now, that is almost certainly not the case. George has just admitted that it was a mistake. He's told people it was a mistake. So do not go in that rabbit hole. It is a false light. Nothing tricky about that. Jane is with Forley Prester, headed towards imprisonment and perhaps rescue. Let's talk about the Freys for a sec. Jaime next heads to the Frey camp to talk to Edwin. He wants to discuss this great transfer of prisoners, but Edwin interrupts him, bringing up the death of Ryman. And we obviously have been following along with that. We saw Brienne's chapter with the crown, and the crown was what Ryman was holding on to, so it helps us with the chronology. Jaime, his main thought, though, is that this isn't one man on an abandoned ruin like Merritt. Merritt being hanged was okay. Well, that's something. But Ryman Frey, heir to the twins, near the twins, with 16 guards. This is a step up from Merritt, who was by himself, and they hanged him at Old Stones, which is really out of the way. It's a ruin that, no one really lives there. So this is definitely bolder, as Jaime puts it, but Joe suggests, too, that it might be part of their desperation. They're less worried about the consequences. They really want to get these guys. And if Stoneheart, her in particular, has very little to lose. I mean, she's already dead. And here's another thing that Jaime and Brienne both talk about, which is what corpses look like. Once they've spent a few days in the river, they all look much the same.
I've heard the same is true of hanged men, said Jaime before he took his leave.
Now, a couple people wonder, since it's snowing at the end of this chapter, are these corpses going to continue to rot, or will they just be there? It may be too long of a time to pass for those corpses to still be hanging there by the time, say, if the others come south. But it's even possible some of these hanged men start walking again, especially the ones in shallow graves, if not the ones that are hanging from trees getting picked at by birds. But if the birds fly south for the winter, who's going to eat those corpses? Do the birds fly south for winter? Do the ravens fly south? I don't know how the ravens work in this. In terms of whether they go south for, I don't think they do, since they're still up north. So other than the Blackfish getting away, it mostly seems like a big victory, but it doesn't in a lot of other ways. He feels content. He feels like, look, I stopped a lot of bloodshed. And to be fair, I do think that's worth praising him for a bit. If he hadn't done things the way he did, it probably would have been a full-on assault. A lot of people would have died. So maybe this isn't great strategy for the Lannisters in the long run. Maybe it won't work out that well for Lannisters in the long run, but it's still a good thing from a human perspective that Jaime prevented a lot of bloodshed, though maybe it's only temporary. Still, though, despite this success, despite being content with himself, now you don't have to agree with him that he deserves to feel content, but he does feel content a little bit, but not for long, because he just keeps thinking about Cersei. Here and in a moment, it's just all over, like back and forth in this chapter, it pops up, and constantly things are reminding him of him, with Sybil, with Jane, with thinking about just different rumors, just the fact that he thinks about Cersei all the time. He doesn't need triggers to think about her. They just pop up. And his mantra of sleeping with Cersei cheating on him, it just means so much to him. It throws him off. It throws him off of his game when sometimes he's having wise thoughts, smart thoughts, and then he starts thinking about Cersei and it starts to fall apart a bit. Back to that in a second. Real quick, mentioning another tie into what we talked about with Brienne and how the Brotherhood are worshiping R'hllor, but there's all this northernness around them too, given their layers, and, well, they're not directly connected to the wolves, but the wolves do come up again. Sir Dermot of the Rainwood, who is Adam Marbrand's sort of co-scout there, one of them goes searches north, one of them goes searches south for the Blackfish. Sir Dermot says hundreds of wolves attack. Hundreds. So it's not just the Brotherhood getting more aggressive, it's the wolves. And this is really wild because wolves attacking armed men, killing one of his horses in this case. Jaime suggests fires around the camp. I don't know if that's going to do much good at all. It might help a little bit. Jaime does at least have the thought, is this Nymeria? He doesn't know the name Nymeria. He just thinks of the beast that mauled Joffrey near the crossroads. And yeah, so the Detective Jaime, good job. He's absolutely right. So there's some more setup here. He's going to be going to Castle Blackwood for his one chapter in A Dance with Dragons. But so we'll cover that when we get there. But we also have things like Strongbor, who's just eager to get into a fight. He wants to go back to Derry to hunt the Hound or Beric or someone. Well, neither of them are there, but maybe he'll run into Lem wearing the helm, and who knows what's going to happen there. I think Strongbor is, in a one-on-one fight with Lem, he would win. But he's not going to have a one-on-one fight with Lem properly. He's probably going to get ambushed, or I don't know. He's not going to find that one-on-one duel he won so badly with outlaws. This guy is headed for a mistake. Jaime has a harsh realization, putting a lot of this together in terms of the food and the people and the weather, and whose job it all is. Quote,
"Winter is marching south, and half our granaries are empty. Any crops still in the fields were doomed. There would be no more plantings, no more hopes of one last harvest." He found himself wondering what his father would do to feed the realm, before he remembered that Tywin Lannister was dead.
So yeah, Jaime, this is probably going to fall to you, my man. Cersei's not going to do it. Who else is going to do it? Mace Tyrell? Kevin, maybe. That would be a reasonable guess. But Kevin, at this point, Kevin has removed himself from command. So, as an option. So maybe he would be an option under different circumstances, but as things stand in this chapter, nope. And it's also, as Nina points out, very poignant for Jaime to have these thoughts, because if we could blame anyone for all this, it's Tywin. So it would have made sense in some way for Tywin to be the one to handle this problem since he created it, but now it falls to Tywin's son. And, yes, but you are not necessarily Tywin's son, are you? And I don't mean like, no, he's not Tywin's son in that blood-wise. I mean, as we've been over a lot, as Jenna has been over, it's Tyrion is the one that takes after Tywin. Jaime, you're not that much like Tywin, but you might be capable of helping feed the realm. We'll see about that. If you get the chance. Maybe you're just too busy with the Brotherhood and being captured and all that. So yeah, the deep snow, as ominous as it is, it also has what Joe calls a top 5 wholesome moment. It's a little bit of refresher. A bit of a refresher from all the horror and tragedy is kids throwing snowballs, right? You got to have that every once in a while. You got to have a little moment or two to remind us of what it's all about, remind us of where the future is going. These children, as they are in the real world or in fiction, they're the future. And it's super important as a theme. We got it in Brienne's chapter with the Brotherhood and taking care of those kids. It was really perhaps more of Brienne's last chapter, but it's still part of her ending arc here. And we've got Doran Martell making it a big part of his pathos, talking about the kids at the water gardens and all that. I mean, it's brought up a lot. And with so many adults, so many rulers and leaders being killed throughout the wars, as the Feast for Crows tells us as a theme, well, it's important not only for new leaders to step forward, but to protect the children, because those are the leaders of the even farther future. Here's another important quote near the end of the chapter. And here's where this is, of course, where we get the notion that Jaime has currently passed on helping Cersei.
A snowflake landed on the letter. As it melted, the ink began to blur. Jaime rolled the parchment up again, as tight as one hand would allow, and handed it to Peck. No, he said. Put this in the fire.
Ice and fire, right? Or snow and fire. Well, the fire, it's about to be there. Put it in the fire. So there's snow and fire. Yeah, there we go. So it's pretty cool. George throwing ice and fire in a couple different ways near the end of the book. It's kind of obviously appropriate for the ending of one of the volumes of A Song of Ice and Fire. To keep us all rooted in what matters most. That is the main theme, of course. We've had many instances of Jaime thinking he's going to leave Cersei behind, or in his head, like, I'm going to break free. This is when he actually does it, and it's a little wild in that it comes at a time when she actually does really need him. These other times, she wants him to do things, but she doesn't need it. She's got other ways to accomplish these goals. This is when she's somewhat desperate, and now this is the thing he says no to. After all these things he's abusively agreed to, he's been berated into doing or done out of a sense of guilt. Now he's somehow clear of that. He's had enough. I'm not exactly sure what pushed him over that line, and I'm not exactly sure what's going to bring him back, because I think something will bring him back. But Joe gives us a list of options. The hurled goblets, joking about his hand and his weakness, the aggressiveness, the cheating is a big one. The sending him away, mismanaging their son, just mismanaging the realm, just being cruel, all these things. Honestly, though, I think the cheating is the biggest of all of them, which is not a great look for Jaime, but still a reason, still a very good reason to not want to be with someone that you were loyal to. So, yeah. But the snowflake also is a reminder. It isn't just a ice and fire, just, hey, ice and fire, woohoo. It's deeper than that. It's the snowflake landing on the letter is also a reminder that he has this important job to do. He has to save the realm from starvation, not his sister from her own shenanigans, from her own self-inflicted wounds. So that is one of the other ironies of Jaime and Sybil, is that he thinks, he had to wonder how much Lord Gawain knew about his wife's scheming. Do you, Jaime, know how much about Cersei's scheming? Nope. You suspect that there's some, but you have no idea just how bad it is. Remember at the end of season 6 when Cersei's like blown everything up and Jaime finally comes back to the capital and he just walks into the throne room and he sees her and he gives her this "what have you done" look? That's what I think of here. Like, what have you done? And he doesn't know yet what has she done. But it's going to happen.
Or who?
Or who? Who have you done? Osmond Kettleblack? Moonboy? So yeah, Sybill's bad. And Jaime says so to her face. And I make this comparison between the two. But Cersei's worse. Yeah, I mean, what Sybil did was awful. But Cersei's done so much more that's awful. The funny line, "Do you want a Westerling to wed a bastard?" Well, yeah. You remember that Jaime and Cersei's kids are bastards, as I pointed out in the last chapter too. So if Jaime is like looking down on bastards, well, he's looking down on his own kids too. But Jaime himself is also, there's some guilt here on his end. I mean, there's the story of Lucamore the Lusty that he thinks about. When he's thinking about Osney Kettleblack, he's like, if Osney Kettleblack slept with Cersei, I could treat him like Lucamore the Lusty. He had a bunch of kids with his, he was a Kingsguard who had a bunch of kids with other women, and then they caught him, they gelded him and sent him to the wall. Like, Jaime, you slept with the queen. You had kids with the queen. Osney slept with the queen too, but he didn't have kids with her. You're more guilty than Osney Kettleblack, my man. I mean, in terms of violating the tenets of their relationship, she broke that. But in terms of like breaking the law and breaking the codes of Kingsguard and all these other things, you're a bigger traitor, according to the rules. And this also reminds us of Terrence Toyne. He thinks of Terrence Toyne and Aemon the Dragon Knight because the Toynes took revenge for their brother. Terrence was a lover of Barbary. Was it Barbary or Barbary's Bethany Blackwood? I think it was who was one of Aegon the Unworthy's lovers, and Aegon the Unworthy was gross by this point, and Terrence was handsome, and so Bethany's like, I'd rather be with him, and Aegon caught them, and had her tortured or made her watch while he was tortured to death, and his brothers tried to kill the king in revenge. They tried to ambush him. They failed, but they did kill Aemon the Dragon Knight. And funny how Jaime thinks Maesters aren't likely to confuse him with Aemon the Dragon Knight, but we've drawn a number of parallels between Aemon the Dragon Knight and Jaime, the youngest Kingsguard, protecting their sister, rumored love story, rumored affair between him and his sister. Hello. Absolutely, the Maesters are going to maybe not confuse you with Aemon the Dragon, but they will absolutely write comparisons, as others in this fandom have, between Aemon and, because they won't know, the Maesters aren't going to know the personal details of either of these characters. They're all detached from this. Even to them, the Maesters writing about all this like 40 years, 50 years later are not going to have necessarily the certainty that Jaime and Cersei were lovers. Because there's a lot of people out there that still are towing the line that those are Robert's kids. We can sometimes take that for granted as readers. But out there in the rest of the world, I mean, think how The World of Ice and Fire is presented as a book. It's written by a maester. It doesn't present Cersei's kids as bastards because the author lives in the world. And if he's aware of that, well, he's not going to present this to the realm. He's not going to, hey, Tywin, I wrote this book about your family that includes the news that your grandchildren are bastards. No, he was smarter than that. So now, back to what I was saying about Jaime and him losing his thought processes when he's thinking about Cersei. He thinks things through efficiently and perfectly sometimes, but well enough. He's no genius, but he's level-headed, mostly reasonable. Again, Detective Jaime. How many times have I said that phrase in this book? But when it comes to his sister, he just does not see these things. He doesn't see how the hypocrisy of hating Sybil while defending Cersei. He doesn't even notice the difference. He doesn't accredit a lot of these things that Cersei is doing that he gives her a pass on that other people he comes down on are as doing not as bad as Cersei. So yeah, that's a real thing that he's maybe starting to realize here, and it's part of him distancing himself from Cersei. But I still wouldn't go that far. A lot of people have a rosier view of what Jaime's done here. He's not breaking up with her because of all this crap. It's mostly because of the cheating. I really think that. And I like Jaime. I think he's a decent person overall. Not a great person. But let's not give him too much credit. I think he's just really wrapped up about the cheating. But with Sybil, not only do we get these wonderful parallels, we get these dark parallels about how Cersei might die. All the elements to Cersei's death are presented indirectly in this chapter. Some of them are fairly direct, but they're not all associated with her. For example, this is how Jaime can strangle his sister with only one hand. Quote,
Jaime would happily have strangled the woman with her seashell necklace.
Yeah, like twisting it like Tyrion did, like twisting it around one-handed or whatever. And when he killed Shae. So discussed here as well when he has his nightly training with Death's representative, Ilyn Payne. What does Death have to say about it?
Ser Ilyn drew a finger across his throat. No, said Jaime. Tommen has lost a brother, and the man he thought of as his father. If I were to kill his mother, he would hate me for it. And that sweet little wife of his would find a way to turn that hatred to the benefit of Highgarden.
the thing is, pretty much all these reasons he's listing off here are going to become moot in short order. What if Tommen's already dead? Or what if Highgarden's already hating you? Or what if Highgarden's out of the picture? And yeah, so it wouldn't matter if he turns that hatred to the benefit of Highgarden, right? Or she. So these are, how will Jaime reconfront this issue when these answers are gone? Maybe he's like, okay, maybe I do have to kill her. I mean, he probably will kill her eventually. So we do have to find our way to that point. So we are looking for clues or something that we think is very likely to happen. I mean, the Valonqar prophecy, I don't see them getting around that. Cersei certainly wants to, but I think it's going to happen. And Nina writes, Jaime disagrees about killing Cersei, not because he doesn't want to, but because he doesn't want to hurt Tommen. But he may want to do that if he goes to King's Landing to find Tommen is killed by an alliance of people who he would have normally considered an ally, or at least didn't consider an enemy. So let's talk about this ghost mom scene. One of the strangest presentations in all the series. It's like, what is happening in this moment? I don't fully understand. It's the details make it unlike anything else. It's too real to be dreamy, too dreamy to be real. It ties back to Jaime's feast beginning as he stands vigil over his father one more and receives a visitor, but it's a real person. It's actually Cersei that time, and this time it's probably Joanna, his mom. He seems, of all the Lannisters, least affected by her death. Of course, Cersei throws it in Tyrion's face, blames him for it, and Tyrion has a lot of undeserved guilt over it. Tywin throws it in Tyrion's face too. Jaime's never done that, but also he hasn't thought about their mother as much. The wounds of their mother being gone has been more obvious in the for his siblings and father. So that also makes this a little more difficult. And it's, what is she talking about? He says, or she says, Jaime's not a knight, Cersei's not a queen. And Jaime's like, well, yeah, I am. And yes, she is. And she cries a little. And it's, Cersei isn't really a queen, though. She's not a true queen. She's not a good queen. And Jaime isn't really a knight. I mean, he is, but he doesn't behave like one. And we've been going over that throughout his whole arc since before his first chapter, how, like Sandor, like Brienne, he was so highborn that he didn't really have another career path. He couldn't really opt to not be one. But he's rejected so much about it, at first for arrogance and selfish reasons, but eventually for reasons that are as noble as they come, despite not being recognized as such, trying to save a whole mess of innocence. So, but still, this doesn't necessarily lead us to an end. These are things we knew before this ghost scene. This isn't telling us Jaime's identity issues aren't new, and they aren't necessarily advanced here either. They're just brought up again. So that's part of what makes it puzzling and makes me think I'm missing something. Or maybe we'll get another scene later that leads us to something. But it also makes me think of what's coming in the next chapter when we're introduced more thoroughly to the concept of glass candles. Now, I have no idea why someone would want to send this dream to Jaime. It doesn't seem to change his attitudes or his direction in life. I don't know what impact it even had on him. Maybe it's why he said no to Cersei. Maybe it's part of that, but it doesn't seem to be connected directly. So it's worth considering that this is a glass candle thing, even though it seems baffling that would be used in this way. But it may not seem baffling once new information is presented to us, too. It could also be coming from another way. As much as the glass candles are somewhat unique in the way they're presented, it is similar to how green seer magic works. We've seen Bloodraven go into people's dreams. That's one of the things that glass candles can do. So maybe Bran is messing with Jaime's head a little bit since he's the one who shoved him. But Bran's POV doesn't give us anything, even remotely, to suggest this. So maybe it's because that chapter hasn't come in Bran's arc yet. But I don't know about that either. So really, awfully baffling. Very baffling. This is right up there with Tyrion passing the Bridge of Dream twice in his chapters in the Dance with Dragons, and with Victarion's moment where the narrative is no longer his POV for about 2 paragraphs. So that's, not that that's the only time that happens, but it's the most blatant time, the Victarion example, by far. So this kind of sits up there with me as one of the most peculiar ways of presenting a scene. Storytelling is almost like George breaks his normal patterns, but only a little bit, and not in ways that we can understand. So we'll be coming back to this when we can understand it better, whenever that is. Note, too, that Jaime's plan on returning to the capital, well, he's being a little like Tywin here. Not because he's being like Tywin. Maybe it's not like Tywin, but he has a similar idea to how to handle things, which is oust Cersei from the Regency and take Tommen away from her. So yeah, arguably that's just common sense. That's not just like what Tywin would do. It's just, don't let the future king be raised by this woman, or anyone who's like this person. But there's also a negative here. As much as we've talked about Jaime back and forth, one of the reasons I can't go so far as to call him a super smart guy. He's a smart guy, but not super smart. Is that he, like so many other people, have the same idea of Littlefinger, that he's not that big a deal. He's like, you know who would be a good hand of the king? Littlefinger. That's Jaime's thought. That's not Cersei. That's not someone else. That's Jaime's. Like, man, Jaime fell for that too. So many people underestimating that guy. Don't forget that. Very little detail amidst so many things completely unrelated to Sansa or Littlefinger or any of that. It just happens to throw that in here.
Yeah, I think Nina pointed out this quote. I just want to mention one part of it.
Yeah.
Where she said, they say, Littlefinger was no threat to anyone. Clever, smiling, genial man. Everyone's friend. Just that little part. Because it's easy to forget that, I think. Because one, of how he looks in the show.
Yeah.
And two, in art. I think he's frequently is depicted as looking, conniving. I don't think he has that look in most things I see him in.
That's a good point, yeah. And also in that quote, it says, he was not a man to fear. Oh, boy. Oh, boy. Coffee sticker pair super chat from Ainsley M. Thank you very much, Ainsley. I'm actually not having coffee today. How about that? I was so excited for this episode.
Yeah, instead he's drinking water out of a very large Last Jedi cup.
Oh, yeah.
Very large indeed. All we see is Coke there now. But there we go. There's Kylo's face.
Also, super chat from Josh Davis down under. Samurai puppy with trophy. Whoa, samurai puppy. That is our first samurai puppy with trophy
I'm pretty sure that's what this is. I think so.
A samurai puppy. Oh. Good catch by Dornish Dame. Possibly George being sneaky with the wording. The line is, Emmon Frey says, no man will take Riverrun from him. In fact, Stefan B. caught the same thing, quoting that, Riverrun is mine, no man shall ever take it from me. And he says, well, Stoneheart's response to that is, I am no man. Yeah, Isabel Harper mentions Rosalind Frey, which is a interesting alternate idea, which is possible, yeah, because that would be Ed Muir's child as well. So, yeah, one or the other, either one is a possible answer. They're certainly a better choice than Emmon. Dornish Dame also says Cersei hated Lyanna for lumbering her with Robert, but I'd love to see her react to finding out that Lyanna had a kid with Rhaegar. Yeah, oh wow, yeah, I never thought about that because she really wished she had been with Rhaegar. Oh, yeah, that's a great point. Man, I never thought about that. This is perhaps not the best place to raise that point, but it is. Not to criticize. I just wish I'd brought this up at some other time because that is really awesome. That's a great point. We'll bring that up again. That's what we'll do. I'm going to bring this up for the wrap-up episode, see what Joe and Lady Gwen and Nina have to say about that.
I think you just want to bring it up again just because you know how much it would bother Cersei for you to keep mentioning this.
Yeah, I just want to get Cersei. That's it. Derry says Rob and Jane's relationship is typical of real-life situations during war. Many women trained to be nurses in the hope they would end up nursing a man who would fall in love with them. Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's always has reminded me of that, about stories from like World War I or something like that, where, a man has a nurse and they fall in love and get married.
English Patient.
Yeah, okay.
That is very much what that movie has a lot to do with.
Yeah, it's a real thing that happened.
Yeah, Elaine hated that movie on Seinfeld. She's like, I hate this movie. I hate it. It's so stupid. But it was a popular, successful film. She really hated it. So I wonder, too, thinking of people besides Tom who might be spies, one suggestion I saw was that the sex worker referred to as the Queen of Horrors. She's another option as a possible spy for the Brotherhood. Anyone who's getting, we talked about it when we talked about Bravos and how anytime you have women who have sharing a bed with a powerful man, there's the opportunity for secrets being spilled. And well, yeah, so that's why checking in with the sex workers is important, because they're the ones who have short-term time with these powerful men. Their own wives aren't as likely to sell their secrets, but yep, men do open up after sex. And so sometimes these sex workers get juicy bits of info. And to finish off the chapter, anime lover Nicole, who reigned as Queen Nicole in our Crusader Kings A Song of Ice and Fire streams that happen every Friday at 6 Eastern. She says, "How's it going, puppy sticker?" Thank you, anime lover Nicole. And I hope your descendants rule wisely over on our game stream. If they don't, it's not my fault. Now, for our last chapter of the book. It's a good one. Samwell 5. The gang meets Marwyn the Mage, a.k.a. Pate is dead. Long live Pate. No book in the series has such a strong connection between its first and last chapter, and especially between the ending lines of both of those chapters. Both are directly tied to this faceless man getting inside the Citadel, probably Jaqen H'ghar, but it doesn't necessarily make a huge difference if it is or not. Just the fact that it's any faceless man is a big deal, but it is more fun thinking of it as Jaqen. The prior books have very focused final chapters, usually a surprise with one single but large plot mover, the birth of dragons, the reveal that Brienne and Rickon and the gang are still alive after all, that Lady Stoneheart is alive after all, or that she exists, if alive isn't your preferred nomenclature. Feast, on the other hand, changes the game. It performs setup for several different plot lines at once, with several small to medium surprises instead of one huge one. This pattern continues in Dance, which uses Kevin's epilogue to speak to almost every single running plot line in the series, even if just briefly. And that's quite a feat, given how many plots there are. Now, that's very similar to what's happening in this book, but there's a little bit of categorization going on. There are certainly examples, like in A Dance with Dragons, like the growing wariness of Robert Strong, the Bridge of Dream, which I just mentioned. Obviously, Varamir and a lot of stuff happening in the north, like Bran's chapters. Those are big, very supernatural. But mostly A Dance with Dragons is politics and war and kings and queens and alliances and such. This book is where that pattern probably started, setting up a lot of things rather than one thing. But instead of all that human activity, all those politics and intrigue and war and kings and queens at the end of Dance, this is where we revisit and boost the slow but sure rise of magic. The supernatural elements are working their way more and more into the story ever since the prologue, obviously. The first prologue, not the Feast prologue. The Feast prologue just kind of kicks it into another gear. This chapter just manages to touch on a huge number of supernatural plots. Here's the first line.
The most perilous part of the voyage was the last.
This whole chapter is Marwyn, glass candles, the face of Pate, Euron. And it's funny because Sam is supposed to be going somewhere safer. And he's left one of the most dangerous things there is, which was the onslaught of the others. He faced them directly. And here he goes all the way to the south. And here's Euron. Here's Faceless Man. Here's like, what? Dang it. Yeah, where the danger, it's everywhere. You managed to go to perhaps the next most dangerous place. One of, anyway. It's in the top 5. We'll see. So Euron's an outlier because he manages to stake a large claim in both of these categories, supernatural and natural. He's a big player in the Game of Thrones and in the mystical side of things that we maybe don't have the best word for. The Eldritch world, the political world, to separate the two. Yeah. So he's a wielder of power, military and sorceress, and political. But we get a lot more here in Feast, as it is a first-hand affair here, while in King's Landing, as far as what's happening in the West with Euron and the Ironborn, they talk about it, send the Red Wine Fleet, and then sit back and wait for results. Here we actually, get firsthand. Only readers know about the magical side to Euron. Sam doesn't know. Cersei surely doesn't know. Kevin, none of these people know what they're dealing with. They have no idea. They know ambitious Ironborn leaders come every once in a while, and it's dangerous when that happens. They know that a skilled, dedicated, ambitious Ironborn leader is really dangerous, even with that said, they have no idea what they're up against. As an indication of how far behind the curve most of Westeros is on not just the danger in the far north, but this danger of Euron, most people don't even know this guy's name. Here's the quote.
The charge was one Sam had never seen before. A red eye with a black pupil beneath a black iron crown supported by 2 crows. Whose banner is that? Sam asked. Zondo only shrugged.
I like how he gives a non-verbal, i.e. silent answer here. Ha. Now, we also, there's no subtlety here about who's doing the pillaging. There's a wrecked ship that has that flag. That's what he's looking at in this quote there. And it's a feast for crows. There's crows on that flag, and there's bodies everywhere, and there's destruction everywhere. It's pretty cool of George to bring back the name of the book in this final chapter very thematically, and in a number of ways, too. Though Euron doesn't have Mance's sheer manpower in numbers, his attacks on Old Town remind me of Mance's attack on the wall. His man's power. Nice. His attacks on Old Town remind me of Mance's attacks on the wall in a way, which is that a few of them seem almost a little sloppy or not particularly well planned, but they're relentless and of varying style and strategy. And like Mance told Jon, he's like, look, I only have to succeed once. Once I'm over the wall, all my men are going to get over. Same deal here. All Euron needs is one of these plans to succeed. And the thing is, one of the reasons some of them might seem sloppy is that they're not necessarily his ideas. He's just sending guys all over the place. We got raiders happening constantly. We got villages being burned. Euron can't be everywhere at once. Some of his own men are probably tasked with trying to get inside Old Town, and maybe he's given them some suggestions, but a lot of them just did it on their own. Like, for example, the thing with the Tyrosh dyeing their beards like the Tyroshi. Euron may not have known his men captured the dye, and they may have just done that on their own. On the other hand, they may have captured that dye, and he's like, now I've got an idea. Y'all do this. So we have no idea how much of this is just certain Ironborn captains performing a general strategy that Euron has employed, and they're somewhat thinking on their own, or whether he's very precisely directing raids in very specific places. One of the things they see, and one example of how Mance is different than Euron, there's a lot of them really, but because for one thing, Mance was trying to get an invite to live on the other side, so he wasn't trying to be so brutal. He was trying to leave some room for friendship to still exist, or at least peace to exist. But Euron is just burning villages, destroying things, and Joe reminds us to connect this to what's happening in the Riverlands. Destruction of villages and food supplies in the south doesn't seem like such a big deal unless you consider the food supplies in the north are largely ravaged and the south is sending food north. What happens if they can't anymore? Then that's the point, isn't it? And here's a nice, thorough quote about how difficult the situation is and just how many of them there are.
These are no mere reavers. The Iron Men have always raided where they could. They would strike sudden from the sea, carry off some golden girls, and sail away. But there were seldom more than 1 or 2 longships, and never more than half a dozen. Hundreds of their ships afflict us now, sailing out of the Shield Islands and some of the rocks around the arbor. They have taken Stonecrab Cay, the Isle of Pigs, and Mermaid's Palace. And there are other nests on Horseshoe Rock and Bastard's Cradle. Without Lord Redwine's fleet, we lack the ships to come to grips with them.
It's funny you said carry off some golden girls, and I looked away when you said that, and I heard golden girls. They carried off golden. Like what? They carried off Betty White? They carried off Blanche Devereaux? No. So, update on that quote. They've taken pretty much all the lesser islands and parts of the arbor now, which is more, going farther than what's been said here. And we get information on that in the Forsaken. And they're fully taking advantage of the situation. That's what they want. The Ironborn are experts, or at least very mindful of opportunities to swoop in and take advantage like this and to destroy. And that's what's happening with the Redwine fleet on the other side of Westeros, who they believe is the only thing that can stop the Ironborn. Well, the Ironborn are Ironborn aren't even are confident they can probably beat the Red Wine fleet too. So this is why this is a step up. This isn't just Ironborn taking advantage of the military not being nearby. This is the Ironborn making it look like they're trying to take advantage of the Red Wine fleet being absent, when in fact they're trying to trap the Red Wine fleet. This is entirely different. The Red Wine fleet probably thinks, oh, we'll sail in there and they'll get scared off because they can't handle our big ships. But Euron has a plan for that too. As for Old Town, the High Towers, as always, are in charge of defending the city. The Hightower family is huge. Oh, they need a sitter for all the big family there, yeah. With Baelor Breakwind building galleys, Garth training recruits, Gunthor in charge of the harbor defense, etc. And he's the one that comes aboard and talks to Kahuru Mo. Now, recall that Jorah's ex-wife Lynesse is his 8th child and youngest daughter. He has 10 kids. Humphrey Hightower is said to be headed to Lys, where she lives, where he will ask for ships and or hire sell sails. They certainly have the coin for it. The Hightowers are mad rich. Now, can you imagine, though, if he hired Salador San, who was just let go by Stannis? I mean, he's Lyseni. I wonder about that. I've always definitely considered how Salador might come back into the story. Maybe he won't, but this is certainly an option. 2 of the Hightower sisters, obviously older than Lynesse, and she's the youngest daughter, are married to houses at the Arbor, which is a potent under-the-radar detail regarding how Lord Leighton and his kin feel about all this. I think 2 of their kin are over there and perhaps in danger, and then by extension, any children they have. It's Layla and Denise. Those are their names. Layla and Denise Hightower. And Nina wonders if we'll see them as refugees, maybe. Maybe they'll have to flee the Arbor. Maybe they'll get away and they'll show up in Old Town. Denise is married to Desmond Redwine. Layla is married to John Cups. Now, John Cups, we're guessing that Cups are Redwine bannermen because of the sigil Cups, like the wine goblet. We don't actually know where they are. It's conventional wisdom that they're one of the houses on the Arbor, and it's totally my headcanon. So, but even if that's somehow not true, we still have the other Denise Redwine, who definitely is, or Denise Redwine, née Hightower. So we'll have to wait on that, but something to be aware of, that there is another family connection there. So when we hear this dialogue, the Hightower must be doing something.
To be sure, Lord Leighton's locked atop his tower with the Mad Maid, consulting books of spells. Might be he'll raise an army from the deeps. Or not. Baelor's building galleys, Gunther has charge of the harbor, Garth is training new recruits, and Humphrey's gone to Lys to hire sell sails.
Though I'm certainly tempted by the notion of an army from the deeps, thinking about the deep ones or that sort of thing. I think this is just sarcasm from this guy saying, joking bitterly about how the Hightower's not doing anything. He doesn't seem to be doing much at all. He's like, yeah, maybe he'll raise an army from the deeps with his spells. Like he doesn't think spells are going to do anything here. That's how I read that. But I'm not going to argue with someone who takes this as one of many suggestions of the rise of greater magic coming along here and there and everywhere. I mean, we don't know anything about what type of magic is available to Leighton Hightower, so I definitely can't be confident that this is just a sideways comment, but that is how it reads to me. And this guy is definitely bitter. Whether or not he's bitter in that particular expression, he's definitely bitter overall. Sam notes it. Here's the quote.
The bitterness of the captain's final words shocked Sam as much as the things he said. If King's Landing loses Old Town and the Arbor, the whole realm will fall to pieces, he thought, as he watched the Huntress and her sisters moving off.
It's that kind of line that when you read it the first time, you're like, oh, Sam is thinking about the importance of the Old Town and Arbor. It's world building. But on a further reread, on a reread or a second reread or what have you, this is not just world building. This is describing what's probably going to actually happen. Which I don't think, when people read this book for the first time, they did not have the conception of just how dangerous Euron was. There was no Forsaken chapters.
Yeah,
Certainly they were...
I'm guessing people reading it, they probably weren't reading it like, oh no, Old Town. What will happen if Old Town is destroyed? Yeah.
You're right. Yeah. I mean, the note, like I brought up at the beginning of this episode when Feast for Crows was new, 2005, late 2005, early 2006, there was not a lot of Old Town's going to be destroyed theorizing back then. That's something that came along later. There were a few smart folk that sniffed it out, no doubt. But it's now a popular theory. It's almost like headcanon for a lot of people, and it's taken the fandom a long time to get to that point, even though it seems pretty clear now, doesn't it? But that just goes to show both the rereadability of this book and the difficulty in perceiving all these things, and for so many people to come to agree with it. Like, for a consensus to emerge within a large community, a whole lot of people have to buy in. And, well, a lot of people have. Joe Buckley wonders if this is a smaller version, or rather a bigger version of Salt Pans, with the Lord sitting in their tower while destruction happens all around them and they just do nothing. I definitely never considered that. Salt Pans might be a microcosm of other events around around Westeros, but now that idea has been presented to me, yeah, it may not be what happens here, but somewhere else, if not here, and here is a fantastic, tragic candidate for it. Now imagine it, though. Imagine the whole realm falling apart and why it's such a big deal for the Ironborn. We can all see why it would be terrible for the realm, but for them, it's like the ultimate victory, the ultimate enabler of the old way. Weakness, lack of institutions, chaos, reduction in community capabilities. That is manna to Reavers. Endless defenselessness. They believe the strong should prey on the weak. It's part of their ethos. And the realm falling apart would make a lot of people weak. It's an ultimate goal sort of thing for them, although Euron's goals are even larger. Man, will they be happy if they get this, and man, it will be tragic. But I do think it's happening. Now, here's a notion for the Forsaken showing perhaps just how confident they are in defeating the Red Wine Fleet. And as well, it's puzzling just how much information they have. Check it out.
"Count yourself blessed, damp hair," said Stonehand. "We are going back to sea. The Red Wine Fleet creeps towards us. The winds have been against them rounding Dorne. But they're finally near enough to have emboldened the old women in Old Town. So now Leighton Hightower's sons move down the Whispering Sound in hopes of catching us in the rear."
Now, how does he know all that? This is very, very specific. Some of it he can maybe reason out, but it's almost as if they have... some people have speculated Euron has a glass candle, and that might explain this, though he's also collected priests, red priests, right? He's got at least one red priest we see in the Forsaken, and we already see him use the winds, like summon winds, which is something we've associated with R'hllorys priests. We've seen Makoro do it, we saw Melisandre do it, and we've seen those same exact red priests scry and see into the future or see what's happening. So I think this is probably what it is, but it could be a glass candle. After all, George loves the parallel storytelling, and this passage, well, not this passage, but this for the Forsaken chapter takes place fairly parallel to this chapter. So I'm very suspicious of that, of this Stonehand. He says now the winds have been against them rounding Dorne. Like, how does he know what's happening all the way over on the tip of Dorne? That's really far away from the isle that Stonehand is speaking from to Damphair in the Forsaken. I mean, they're near the Arbor. That's really far from the tip of Dorne. So that's suspicious for sure. But I think R'hllor is just as likely as Glass Candle. But here's where we can compare the two. Glass Candles are frozen fire. So scrying through fire, scrying through Glass Candle, the Glass Candle is just a more focused tool of the same ilk, right? Obsidian, frozen fire. Yeah, just very similar. Now, I can't predict, of course, one way or another, what Lord Leighton is actually doing. They're making it sound like he's not doing enough. And there is definitely a theme of underestimation in this chapter. Pate is underestimated. He's actually a faceless man. Sam himself is underestimated, including by himself. And he's told to play it meek so as to make the Archmaesters underestimate him even more. He must not be threatening to their agenda. More on that in a minute. The Archmaesters do underestimate magic and try to snuff it out. But if they knew how powerful it was and it's how it's on the rise, I don't know that that's even a reasonable goal, if it ever was. Marwyn downplays prophecy a bit, though he runs off to Dany, so he's probably not underestimating that. However, he does seem to be underestimating how hard it will be to get to Slaver's Bay, as Quentin Martell could attest. In Lord Leighton's case, perhaps he is being underestimated or doing the underestimation of Euron. I would suspect the latter, but it could be both. Like, he could be working really hard, but also not understand just how dangerous Euron is by not realizing all the weapons and tools Euron has at his disposal, meaning supernatural stuff. Like, I seriously doubt Leighton is preparing for Krakens, like real Krakens. I mean, most readers aren't either, unless you've heard us talk about it a lot. So related, as I said in the intro to this episode, this theme of underestimation and infiltration, disguise is part of all that. Alaris the Sphinx most certainly is Sarella Sand, daughter of Oberyn. There's the Ironborn dressing up as Tyrashi and Pate as Jaqen, of course. Some pretty solid examples there. Sam avoids the alleys. Speaking of faceless men, Sam avoids the alleys when he's walking to his destinations. He knows Old Town. He's been there before. He grew up not near it, but close enough that he's been there a few times. Hornhill is, not that far away, but not exactly super close either. In a dark alley is where Pate was killed, in this very city. And Daron, too. Darion, not Daron. Darion in Bravos by Arya, who is, say, faceless man in training. So pretty similar. So it's like he chose wisely, though not fully understanding all the reasons for making his decision when he decides to send Gilly to Hornhill. Not only is Randall not there, but Dickon's probably not either. So do not be of a mind of what happened in the show. Of course, in the show, they went there before the Citadel too. So everything's all out of whack. And he stole the sword. More on that in a minute. But Dickon is now married to Eleanor Mooton. Not at this moment, but in the Dance with Dragons appendix. It's confirmed that Eleanor and Dickon are actually married. So it's not just a betrothal anymore. And since Tarly's goal was to have his son control Maidenpool, well, I doubt he brought her down to Hornhill for the marriage. He probably went up to Maidenpool to marry Eleanor and then stay there. So right now, Hornhill is probably just ruled by Sam's mom. And while he's walking around town, he thinks about how this is what he should have always been doing. He's like, man, this is what I should have been doing. I should have been a maester from the beginning. And if not for his dad's pride, isn't that a way more reasonable solution than forcing him to go to take the black and threatening to kill him? Why not just do this? Well, the reason is Randall Tarly's a very proud man who can't do this, which is a terrible reason, but it is the reason.
But also Westeros and the world would have been doomed. If
Yeah.
Randall Tarly had not been a proud man and sent Sam to the wall, I don't know what would have happened. Sam is really crucial to all of this.
That's true. You're right. That's a good point. So Randall deserves credit, is what you're saying?
Yes.
He's a good man.
Applause for Randall.
Shay loves Randall Tarly. You heard it here first. So that would have been a better way to handle this. So here's Sam thinking about that.
I should have come here when I was their age, Sam thought. If I had run off and taken a false name, I could have disappeared amongst the other novices. Father could have pretended that Dickon was his only son. I doubt he would have even troubled to search for me, unless I took a mule to ride. Then he would have hunted me down, but only for the mule.
So Leo Tyrell seems to have been told Sam was dead. Again, pride is why he did that. Randall would rather everyone think his son dead than on the wall. And a maester is just as embarrassing, if not worse, because of the proximity and the whole servitude thing. Randall didn't want other lords like seeing Sam, like by accident, like running into him on the street. Sam mentions not wanting to see friends of his or enemies of his father either, but we might see that. There's some opportunities. Alacane Florent, who is the attainted lord of Brightwater, fled to Old Town to seek refuge at the High Tower. He's the son of Alistair Florent, and his sister Rhea is Leighton's fourth and current wife, and his sister Melissa is Sam's mother. So Alacane is Sam's uncle. So Alacane is going to quite possibly will be there in Old Town complaining about how Garland Tyrell is trying to steal his seat of Brightwater Keep. Meanwhile, Garland has actually been distracted by the Shield Islands being taken. So everything's in chaos, but this is a small character who might turn up to matter. As far as hunting him down for the mule, this is what I mean about Randall. We've seen aggressively hunting bandits before. So hunting a mule makes sense, kind of. But I bring up the TV show again because of the theft of Heartsbane was so strange in the show. And yeah, well, if he would chase after Sam for a mule, you damn sure better believe he'd come after him for stealing his Valyrian steel blade. On the other hand, even in the show, Tarly just didn't have time. Like, Daenerys showed up on the continent. So, yeah, I guess that's more a higher priority than going after your sword. Still, he wouldn't forget about it. So Sam meets Alleras the Sphinx thanks to the glass candle, and he tells his story to the girl disguised as a boy. And he also sees green Valyrian sphinxes as he enters the building. Sphinxes, in this case, the bodies of lions, the wings of eagles, and the tails of serpents. What is that? Targaryen Aaron Lannister? Or is it just not? Is that not the point? So we're no closer to understanding what Aemon meant by the Sphinx is the riddle, not the Riddler. We jumped ahead to this to talk about it. At the time, it confuses Alleras when Sam blurts it out. She's like, what are you talking about? So it remains pretty wide open. Alleras is a riddle of sorts. Tyrion also works pretty well, maybe. Part lion, part dragon. Doesn't have the wings of eagles, but if he rides a dragon, maybe that'll sort of be like that. And he's missing his nose, like the real Sphinx.
Also worth mentioning, the Citadel with its Valyrian sphinxes out front.
Oh, right. That's what I was just describing.
Yeah, I just mean, like, in terms of Alleras having that, like, association.
Yeah, they're brought together, like, the same time. It's like,
Sphinxes? Like, really makes you think of Sphinx is there, whereas Tyrion is kind of, I don't know.
Yeah, how does he associate with any of this? Like, that's, even though he seems to fit the description pretty well, it's the same thing with, like, trying to tie Jaime's dream to the glass candles. It's like, it kind of fits, but it doesn't seem to make much sense.
Why?
But why? Yeah, it's like,
what is the significance of this?
Yeah, it's a logical connection in terms of detail, but not in terms of storyline and plot so far. So then he tells his whole story, like minus the swapped babies and Bran Stark stuff. But this is a lot of stuff. Dragons, whites, others, dragonglass, cold hands. Alleras hears it all. She's the curious type and was sent by Marwyn in advance, so she's got plenty of reason to pay close attention. Thus, we see what I meant at the start of this chapter when saying that this chapter touches on a huge array of magical plot lines. Dragons and whites, prophecies from multiple sources, ice and fire, you name it. Alleras, like the rest of us, laments the loss of Maester Aemon and remarks how much we could have learned from him about the time of his father's reign. That's a bit of an in-joke, I think. His father was Maekar, a man very much like Stannis. His hand to the king was Bloodraven, someone with a fair bit in common with Melisandre, though not as near as much as Maekar and Stannis have in common. Still, a lot of parallels and related parallels here. Maekar ruled after the death of his brother Aerys I, not the Mad King, Aerys I. Also a man obsessed with prophecy, by the way. Supposedly, Aerys I was the one to rediscover some of the very prophecies discussed in this chapter. Both Stannis and Maekar lived through a long summer that some thought of as the Great Summer, and of course, after a long summer comes a long winter, and they both faced that. Maekar was killed during the winter while facing down a rebel. Well, maybe Stannis will also die during winter while in battle. That makes some sense, or facing some foe. But anyway, the joke here, it's an in-joke when Alleras says, boy, we could have learned a lot about Maekar's reign from your father, or from Aemon, not your father, from Aemon. And it's kind of a running joke within the deep, deep fandom, especially those of us who pay a lot of attention to the history, that Maekar's reign is quite undescribed. There's a lot of lacking detail, and this we think is on purpose because Dunk and Egg is set to happen. Some of the stories are set to happen during Maekar's reign, so George doesn't want to write himself into a corner. Our Blackfire Rebellion series contains a lot of what we do know on Maekar's reign, mostly the Bloodraven episodes. Maekar's death led to a great council because Daeron the Drunkard was dead, Aerion Brightflame drank wildfire, and Aemon was a maester. And Egg, who got the crown, even though he was unpopular, but he did win the Great Council. He was in line to inherit, and he was the Great Council's winner. So, anyway. Now, a very curious aspect of Bloodraven's time as Maekar's hand was the presence of magic. Despite the reputation of that time being a low magic era, now Bloodraven's own magic is one thing, but there was also Shiera Seastar and Mad Danelle Lothston. Both of them were rumored wielders of sorcery, Danelle more of the black arts, and Shiera just magic in general. But both of them were said to use magic to keep themselves looking young. Not to mention Aemon's claim that all his brothers dreamed of dragons, which would have been during this era as well. Daemon's dreams, or Daeron's dreams, were on display in the Hedge Knight, of course. Thus, even this seemingly minor comment from Alleras about Aemon and his father Maekar is a substantial rabbit hole of not just major interest, but fairly direct in connection to several of the currently ongoing plots, as well as probably some others later. So when we consider all the possible ways Lord Leighton might wield magic, it could be any of these things or none. It could amount to rumor. More on that in a minute. Let's talk. Let's take a detour here, as Alleras and Sam do, to the Isle of Ravens, with the Ravenry being the oldest part of this ancient place. So that's already a hint we're going somewhere important. Ravens are a crossover device creature to occult from non-occult, right? The ravens in the old days, they could speak the messages. They clearly, and they have singers in them, according to A Dance with Dragons. But now maesters use them inefficiently. They're still efficient. They're still really useful, passing messages over a long way, carrying the messages. But it's interesting to see that we think of technology in the real world and technology advancing for the most part, but technology isn't just a always forward progress kind of thing. In our lifetimes, it pretty much has been, but that's not the way of the world always. And this is an example of that, but with a twist. With magic thrown in, you've got two different concepts, magic and technology, and they sort of fight against each other sometimes. Sometimes they work together, depending on who you are. Here is where they kind of come together. Magic is pushed aside, but it's still clearly there. The elements of it are still there. The glass candles are still there. They're used as an example of how magic is gone, which is pretty ironic. Again, more on that in a minute, too. Sticking with Bran and the Ravens and Sam and Alleras going to the Isle of Ravens. So it's pretty thick, this symbology. The ravens are a really wonderful symbol of how magic was perhaps superior to technology in this realm, and in certain ways. Not necessarily better, but superior, more powerful. Powerful isn't necessarily better, as we know well. But this transition of magic to maesterly and this instinct that the maesters have to take magic out of the world, well, that may not be a good thing. Certainly some elements of magic are menacing the entire planet, perhaps, with the others and all that. But other elements of magic might be the way that it's saved, that they're all saved from it. So, So it's an interesting way to introduce the glass candle in person by having it look very spooky to Sam. But it brings us back to this talk about technology. If you or I were to see this glass candle, we would think it was some lamp. I mean, it's just a tall, black, shiny thing. I mean, Sam, it looks really weird to him because the way the shadows are cast, there's no flickering and flame, but that's normal to us. Lamps, that's like every lamp. Lamps only flicker when they're not working properly. And they do cast really big shadows, because like this one does, because they cast really bright light. The brighter the light, the darker the shadow. So this is really neat to me that Sam is confronted with technology and magic, but it's magic technology, and he's reacting the way a person would to new technology. I think that's super cool. This is just how this is how a person that's never seen electricity would look at a lamp. But on the other hand, it's more than a lamp. It's like a cell phone, right? The sorcerers of the Freehold could see across mountains, seas, and deserts with one of these glass candles. You'd be looking in some wild places if you could actually do that. This is also tied to Bran. When Bloodraven's explaining how his powers will eventually work, he says eventually you won't even need the werewolves. You can just look wherever you want, including in the past. Okay, cell phones. Well, you can kind of look in the past with a cell phone, but but not exactly. Not literally. You can see things that were recorded in the past. So Marwyn, though, that's another thing. Just like Bran has not mastered his gifts yet, there's no reason for us to think Marwyn has mastered this glass candle. He's just like, whoa, it turned on. There's things we can do with it that has been said. And he does use it. Alleras tells Sam he used it to see him coming. But that's the only explicit example of it being used that we can confirm from Marwyn. We can feel fairly confident that Quaithe is using a glass candle because she just appears in Dany's room one time and no one else sees her, and it really fits the description quite well. So we also should compare, but backing up a little bit, how did he know to look for Sam? How did Marwyn know Sam was coming? That's another thing. We talk about that with Bran, and we say, oh, Bran basically can look anywhere and do anything, but he has to know what to look for first. Well, then how did they know Sam was coming? How did they know to look for him? Well, maybe they saw him some other way. Maybe they were looking for something else and saw that. But still, open question. Very curious about that. It seems to be worth pursuing for a full answer there. Comparing the conversation about glass candles from the prologue to one here is very interesting. Armin the Acolyte tells the tale of how all prospective maesters spend that evening with the glass candle, how it represents them, and how it never lights. Leo laughs at him, telling him he's seen it light. It's the same candle. This is symbolically and literally throwing shade on the maesterly notion of shutting down magic. It's pretty funny when you think about it. It's like they use the glass candles as a symbol of magic being dead, of shortcuts not being around. You have to work hard. And the very object they say as an example of the death of magic lights back up magically. It's like, actually, we work again. So if a dead artifact that in part proves there are no shortcuts through magic, does the return of magic prove that there are shortcuts? Yes. That's another theme of this chapter. It's not just this artifact. There's other artifacts. We wonder what kind of artifacts, how these horns will work, how Valyrian steel will work on the others. What else does the High Tower contain? What else does the Citadel contain? What other dead artifacts do they have that aren't dead anymore? And so it's been a theme before. It's a theme of this chapter, in the prologue of A Game of Thrones, and A Clash of Kings, and A Storm of Swords, and A Dance with Dragons, and it's in all the prologues. Dead powers rising again and or explored. Here it's armies from the deep. Even if that doesn't mean anything, it's still thrown out there. It's this chapter that gets mentioned of all the chapters. Glass candles lighting, old prophecies coming to life, seemingly real. A weirwood tree covered in ravens for good measure. I mean, I didn't even mention that tree, did I? There's a weirwood tree with purple moss growing on it, covered in ravens, kind of like the Raven Tree Hall raven, but still half alive, whereas the one at Raven Tree is fully dead. Now, we got a faceless man. We've hardly even talked about him because we talked about him in advance. I mean, he's looking for old books. We got Euron's magic too. What else is there? The soundtrack to this question is led by horns, my fellow Westorians, like I said. But we're thinking of the High Tower and what mysteries lie within. Let's not get too lost in the clouds. Joe has a few notes on Marwyn. He says the first man mentioned by Mirri Maz Duur so long ago, or he was the man first mentioned by her so long ago. Then Qyburn mentions him as well. So getting to see him on page is sort of, there's been build up for this. He's obviously a guy that knows things. Has the potential to reveal things to us. Yet he's in and out really fast. The dude is just like talks to Sam for a minute, hears his whole story, which is a thorough story, but isn't actually related to us because there's no reason to repeat it on page. We know what it is. As soon as he hears it, he says a few things and leaves. It's like, whoa. And it's interesting, too, how unmaester-like this guy is. He looks like... It's not just unmaesterly. He looks almost opposite of a maester. Big dude, muscular, kind of unkempt, threatening. Yeah, but smart for all that. But, yeah, still something else is up with this guy. You wonder, too, Joe wonders what would Maester Lewin... think about the glass candles lighting, you know?
Yeah, that's interesting because obviously Lewin, wasn't a total skeptic.
Yeah, he forged the link. Yeah, he became a skeptic.
Yeah, exactly. He became one. So he would have been happy, I guess. I think he would have been very happy.
Yeah, he'd become unskeptical, I guess, or I don't know. He just didn't live long enough to see all the detail. You know what else is cool about the glass candles? It's kind of like a miniature High Tower, right? It's like long and tall and foreboding and mysterious and magical with a light on top and very, very old. The coloring is very different. Of course, the High Tower is not black like the candles, but the base is made of that ominous and even more ancient, strange black stone. That's black. It's not obsidian, but it's something. Now, not all the glass candles are black. Obsidian comes in other colors, so do the candles since they're made from them. In fact, the other mention is of a green one. So we got black and green again. Those colors have meaning, especially in Old Town where the greens were had sort of the seat of their power. Sort of. It was probably their most important location other than King's Landing itself. Like it comes to the glass, like it was with the glass candles, like it often is with magic, giving us additional information only opens up more possibilities. Even as it helps us narrow some things down, new questions appear. Like playing prediction whack-a-mole. You knock down one mole and two more pop up, and yeah. A few more details, though. like the Faceless Man, who is very likely Jaqen H'ghar, possibly the one who slew Balon Greyjoy also. Consider what we learned, discussed about Arya and her training, the importance of waiting, of patience, of attention to detail. Jaqen here does two things, assuming it's Jaqen, does at least two things that are mistakes in theory. They're not how Pate would behave. In other words, they're leaks in his disguise. It's almost sloppy. Here's what I mean. Quote.
Dragonglass, Pate said. The small folk call it dragonglass. Somehow that seemed important.
That's the prologue. And now we get this.
Obsidian, said the other man in the room, a pale, fleshy, pasty-faced young fellow with round shoulders, soft hands, close-set eyes, and food stains on his robes.
So that's a minor example. The bigger example is at the end when Pate says, fake Pate says his name is Pate, like the pig boy. In the prologue, we learn that not only does Pate hate that name, he thinks his mother must have hated him to give him that name, but Leo constantly mocks him with Spotted Pate, the pig boy, out loud, so all his friends hear this. So everyone knows Pate hates that name. So it's interesting. Now, it would be like Jon introducing himself as Lord Snow before being elected Lord Commander. He hated the name Lord Snow because it came from Sir Alliser and was meant to be mocking. Now he technically is Lord Snow, but you still get the point. So one might argue, Aziz, well, maybe this is just to help the reader realize this is not Pate. But we already know that. Even a first-time reader has seen quite clearly Pate get killed by the alchemist. You may not, as a first-time reader, recognize that it's Jaqen or that it's even a Faceless Man, but you know very clearly that Pate is dead and this isn't him because that dude's dead. So you definitely, even on the first time through, know something's up here. So this is my take on why he's a little sloppy. Maybe there's urgency. Some missions have the luxury of you can take your time. As long as the person is killed, it doesn't have to be right now, as long as it's within the next few months or year. Oftentimes, though, you do have to have it quick. You have to kill that person right away or something, because I'm not sure if that Jaqen's trying to kill someone here. So there's so many huge earth-shattering events are coming, not to mention an invasion or three. So maybe the point is Jaqen is waiting for something outside to take action. He's waiting for a certain trigger, waiting for a certain signal. So maybe time was of the essence. Now that he's in place, he's just waiting. But I don't know. Whatever's happening, this Faceless Man seems to have been there for a few months. I'm not, the timeline is unclear, but the alchemist killed Pate in the prologue, and he's still there now. So whatever he's doing, he's either waiting to do it, or he's still doing it, or he hasn't had a chance to do it yet. So that means a lot, that Jaqen has seemingly has been there for months, or at least a month.
Here.
Yeah.
So obviously Pate is kind of made fun of and all that.
Yeah.
You know, Jaqen must have such willpower to put up with it. He's in Pate's body and everyone's just doing that to him.
Yeah, or he's just like not hanging out with him as much or something. I don't know. Yeah.
Maybe that's the call. He just chose not to hang out with him.
I wonder too, has he learned how to use the glass candle? Does he know how to use it already? Maybe he's seen Marwyn use it. Like, he's standing right there when they're talking about it. And well, there's this conversation that happens in front of him too. What feeds the flame?
Asked Sam.
What feeds a dragon's fire?
Marwyn seated himself upon a stool. All Valyrian sorcery was rooted in blood or fire. The sorcerers of the Freehold could see across mountains, seas, and deserts with one of these glass candles. They could enter a man's dreams and give him visions and speak to one another half a world apart, seated before their candles.
Perhaps the comet lit them and enabled the dragons, so to speak, right? The comet came, activated old powers, or maybe it's the other way around, something like that. We don't know. It's a chicken and the egg question. Either way, fire magic is on the rise, either way, plot-wise and ancestrally connected to Dany. We've seen a lot of it. Like I said, Quaithe probably has one of these or an equivalent power. But Marwyn, so Marwyn tells us all this really interesting stuff. He runs off, apparently, to get to Dany, and though I've brought up maybe he'll have trouble getting there, we'll worry about that later. He also says some things that I think are a little conspiratorial that don't really necessarily add up. Here's a quote.
Who do you think killed all the dragons the last time around? Gallant dragon slayers armed with swords? He spat. The world the Citadel is building has no place in it for sorcery or prophecy or glass candles, much less for dragons.
Well, most of the dragons died in the dance. A few of them survived, and they did seem, at least one of them had strange health issues and didn't grow very well. And one of them, named Morning Light, we don't really know what happened to, so maybe that one was poisoned by the Maesters. But the majority of the dragons died in battle, unless he's suggesting that the Maesters somehow started the Dance of the Dragons, which is not entirely impossible, but I don't think so.
There is a connection there in the High Towers, Old Town, Dance of the Dragons, but that's very much conspiracy theory.
Yeah, that's them taking the throne, not like So you're right to bring that up, but yeah, it's just to bring it up to show that it probably is a dead end, and so he's exaggerating maybe that this Citadel has done this much, but even if they've done some, that's still significant, right? And he also brings up why do you think Aemon was left up on the wall? Because his blood and what he knows, and it's like, well, but Aemon took Night's Watch vows, like not just Maester vows. He took Night's Watch vows. He has to stay there. I mean, unless his Lord Commander sends him south, like what happened. So he's acting like the Citadel kept him up there when his vows kept him up there. So that to me is it's a pushback on Marwyn. Now, a couple people weighed in and saying, yeah, when you have an academic type who's kind of kept out of the inner circle, that's the kind of stuff that happens. They start to get ideas. So he might be on the right track, but has exaggerated. But maybe the other information is wrong. Maybe Marwyn is clearer sighted than some of these other pieces of data we have. So anyway, but something to keep an eye on. Either way, Sam is told quite thoroughly to not bring any of this up, which is strange too, because that's going to leave Sam conflicted. Aemon's like, tell them all. And Marwyn's like, tell none of them. So it makes me, you got to wonder just a little bit. It's also very tinfoily, but maybe Marwyn is sabotaging things here. Maybe he's the opposite of what he seems. I don't think so, but it's worth bringing up as a notion. Okay, wrapping up here. That is it. There's so much to say about that. I didn't really know what is an interesting challenge for us to know which thing to focus on the most there and how deep to go into these rabbit holes, because we don't want to go too deep in these rabbit holes. We talk about them in other topics, other episodes, and we kind of want to save some of that for then. But it's so hard to find, where do we stop? Where is too far on this rabbit hole? Where do we need to back up and start with a different rabbit hole? But boy, that Sam 5 has a lot of rabbit holes, doesn't it? Brand Winslow sends a super chat, says, thanks for all you guys do. So glad to have joined this community. Ashay is the best. It is known. Looking forward to Dance and beyond. Well, thank you, Brand, for joining in the community. We're glad that it welcomed you and that you found a lot of fun with us, and your thoughts have been very helpful to forwarding the discussion. Aegon the Sixth sends a super chat as well and says, farewell, A Feast for Crows. Yes, it is sad, but of course we'll be referring to it so many times. We'll be referencing this book relentlessly and endlessly, of course, because it is so very valuable, and so many things are going to relate to it. We're going to be going forward and be like, oh yeah, that's that thing that happened in Feast. Dornish James says, in my opinion, the amount of info in the appendix on the High Tower suggests they have a part to play in wins. Yeah, I think the fact that they add 10, there's 10 children, I mean, we knew already, but the fact that all of them are getting roles, they're all getting jobs, yeah. Both the High Tower and the High Towers, they're about to have their moments, hopefully many moments, but they haven't really been that big a part to date. They've been a huge part in history, and that's another thing. As much as they've been set up in Fire and Blood, they were also set up in A Feast for Crows, they were also set up really big in Fire and Blood. More backstory on them, more information on them. Dance with the Dragons, obviously. From Facebook, our member Shara Seastar brings up that Alaris brings up a point about a suggestion, a theory that Alaris might be crucial in dealing with the plague, since that is an original part of the Sphinx myth with Oedipus. The Sphinx was afflicting Thebes with plague. And when Oedipus answered the riddle correctly, the Sphinx lifted the plague and killed itself, which is odd. But old myths do that. They're weird. So Pycelle brings up there was a plague in Old Town when he was young. And of course, we got the worry of grayscale or maybe other plagues come into Old Town. And that was when? During the reign of King Maekar, who we just talked about. Yeah, so Pycelle brought up that the Lord of Hightower did what he had to do to stop the plague from spreading, but then the people killed him because they didn't like how he handled it, even though it was the right thing to do. Very cool. Mona Radu adds on to this. She says she recommends reading Jung. In Greek myth, the riddle is a trap because Oedipus is led to kill his father and marry his mother after solving the riddle. So he solves the riddle, thinks he's saved everyone, but then he accidentally marries his mother, and that's the whole Oedipus complex, and all that happens. So that's Mona relates that to the quote by Marwyn with prophecy and how prophecy will bite your prick off. So.
Can I also just say that
Sure.
that it's young?
Yeah.
Anyways, just not young.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
I thought there was multiple ways to say it.
Anyways,
doesn't matter.
It just drives me crazy. That was all.
On Discord, we had lots of great discussions about maesters and dragon access and dragon keeping and how that may like the means and mechanism of them, getting to the dragons to poison them, whether they, if they had access to eggs or, their ability to kind of be left to their own devices within castles and things like that. So they have that. Some of the evidence is certainly there. Confusion about Gilly and the ship if Marwyn takes it. That's another thing that comes up. It's like, well, if Marwyn just takes that ship, won't Gilly still be on it? It's like, I don't think so. I mean, the Cinnamon, they were nice to her. They were friendly. I don't think they're just going to steal off with Gilly. And also, I don't really think that Marwyn's necessarily going to take the Cinnamon Wind. Like, he's like, that ship will do, but how does he know they're going to go there? I mean, seems like they'd want to go back to the Summer Islands first. He's like, take me to Slaver's Bay. This isn't a taxi. So I don't know about that either. Treagle brings up a comment here. Sam sees an old man, 2 acolytes, and a young woman with a baby getting on a boat to go to the Bloody Isle, which is one of the small islands around Old Town. I have no idea what's going on in that scene, and I have no idea what the Bloody Isle is, and there's no description of it in the wiki other than it's a small island right there. So I don't know what this means, but file that away. I was curious too, but we'll see. Also, Sam seems to be decent at archery now. That's kind of cool, right? Shooting at the Ironborn from with the bow. He thinks he may have even got them. And it's nice too. We'll end on a positive note. Gilly is pretty happy. She's loves the baby. She's a mom. It's not her baby, but she loves his baby. And and I personally think Horn Hill is pretty safe, like I said before. So I think if she gets to go there, which it seems likely, she'll probably be okay. Especially with Randall and Dickon not being there. Just all the moms and sisters who, according to Sam, they're going to treat her well. So hopefully he's right about that.
Yeah, we at least saw that in the show, which is different and wrong and all that as it was. We did see a nice moment of Gilly getting along with Sam's female relative.
Right on. And that is it, folks. Feast for Crows is in the books.
Yeah, Feast for Crows is digested.
So last week we covered 199 minutes, 30 seconds. This week, 167.53. That's the full book. 2,030 minutes, 35 seconds, 100%. As always, check the video length compared to the podcast if you want to see how much gets edited out. Gives you an idea of how we do things on the back end just a little bit.
We're about 3 hours into the video.
Yeah, right on the tip there. I'll probably get it under 3 hours for the edited version, but not a whole lot under.
But are you not going to split the podcast in half?
No.
Okay.
This isn't that long. It was 3 hours last week. I split it when it gets to 3.5 or more. That's the split threshold. So we mentioned the Joanna Lannister episode. That's one worth checking out if you want more on her. The Blackfish episode comes up again. We talk about Blackfish a lot, so there's more on his outlook as well there. We mentioned the Gemstone Eyes, so that's another reference to the Great Empire of the Dawn episode that we did. Ash Eye as well is relevant. And, of course, I would love to shout out Michael's map again. He's done the Reach map. We brought it up last week, I think. And I want to mention it again here at the end because we brought it up at the beginning last time. Not just to suggest you get it. You can get a copy maybe through Phantommaniacs.com. That's one way to get it.
You can also get it on a cup or a blanket through Phantommaniacs.com. Or you can just get the digital copy and print it yourself.
That too. Definitely. Shay is right. But also I want to mention that you can join our Facebook group and find your way to the Model Earth group, which is where you post a picture of yourself, some data about yourself, and you make it pick to be a character on one of the next maps. I mean,
yes. I
got myself right here. Look, I always feel better knowing that I'm watching over myself as I podcast. This gives me all this confidence.
But for Model Earth, we want anyone to join, no matter who you are. But if you're a man, we extra want you to join. So don't feel shy, please.
Yeah, we have lots of excellent options amongst the women, but you're also welcome to continue to join as well. We're certainly not saying don't join if you're a woman, but we have a specific need for more dudes.
Yeah, we have a need for men.
A need for dudes. Need for men. Man hunting. Next time is our wrap-up episode. We won't start dance for a few weeks. I'm going to try to wrap up. In the meantime, we're going to wrap up some of the scripted episodes and other content that I haven't been able to focus on. So get your questions ready for the wrap-up episode. If you think we missed anything or didn't expand enough on certain topics, let us know. It should be the same group at 3. We've confirmed Nina and Lady Gwen. Joe hasn't yet, but I believe he'll be there. And so that's really exciting. We've got some questions that some of y'all asked after the fact, so we saved the question for the end here. So some of y'all that never got your questions answered will have that happen now. And but there's room for more. Send us anything you want, any thoughts, any questions, any comments, whatever you like. We'll be digging deep on next Sunday and then taking a few weeks off, working on other episodes, and then coming back with Dance of Dragons before October, I think, but we'll check in with our various groups. It hasn't been set exactly which week we're going to start yet. Thanks to Ashea for handling so much at once. Thanks to Joe and Nina for their invaluable contributions, and please check out their work on their outside of Valar Rereadis. Thanks to our wonderful mods over on our Facebook group. They do such a great job of posting the episodes, keeping the discussions clean and fun and happy and thorough. Also, all of y'all who participate on Flick, Facebook, Slack, and Discord, same goes to you. It takes a group to have a group discussion. Thanks again to Michael for his maps. Thanks to Kevin MacLeod for the intro music that Michael found for us through him. Thanks to Joey Townsend and Jesse Kowal for our regular music. Thanks to the Bengineer for making it all sound better. Thanks to our patrons for the financial support, which is invaluable. We would not be here without you all. And if you are thinking of joining the group, go to patreon.com/History of Westeros and see the level that's right for you. And as always, we recommend you check out Here Be Dragons. If you're listening to the podcast version of this, you'll have to be in front of a computer at 6 o'clock on a Sunday Eastern. But if you're watching the video, you can switch over right now. Their guest is Sue the Fury from Watchers on the Wall and Con of Thrones fame. And I'm going to have to check out some of that. What are they talking about? Is this an interview? I know that nerd?
Yeah, I know that nerd.
Oh,
yeah,
cool. Right
exactly.
on.
So it's
Excellent.
always fun to learn more about other people in the fandom. Aziz and I have both done it.
Yeah, sort of an AMA kind of thing, but a little more of an interview.
Yeah.
Right on. Cool. All right, then. Thanks, everybody. We will be back with Dance of Dragons, like I said, but in the meantime, keep an eye out for other drops. I'm not going to tell you what they are yet, but one of them is going to be Blackwood Part 2, so I'll tell you that one. And again, thank you all very much for being here, for coming live, for supporting us, for supporting being part of the fandom. At the end of the book, I want to add a little extra thanks. So there it is. And we'll see you soon. More Valar Rereadis.